Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, creaky step back in time, to a place where the nights are long, the air is bone-deep cold and central heating doesn't exist. You're in a medieval village now, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Winter is coming, and it's not some poetic metaphor. It's real, it's ruthless, and it's here to gnaw at your fingers, your toes, and your will to live. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I want to know what kind of night you're having. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step outside your timber-framed cottage and pull your wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. The sun's dropped below the horizon, and a mean little wind cuts through the thatch-roofed village like a thief with a blade. Every puddle has turned to jagged glass. The mud is rock. Smoke limps from chimneys, trailing into a colourless sky. Your breath fogs instantly, hanging in the air like a ghost reluctant to move on. It's mid-December in a nameless village somewhere in northern Europe. Probably England or France, maybe even the Holy Roman Empire. Doesn't matter. Wherever you are, it's freezing. The birds are gone, the trees are skeletal, the fields lie brittle under frost. If you were rich, this would be the season of furs and feasts. But you're not rich. You're a peasant, and you live from season to season, hoping the next one doesn't kill you. The thing is, the winter wants you dead, and it's not even trying to be subtle about it. By this point in the year, most of your stores are already running low. You've salted meat, dried beans, and maybe, if you're lucky, a few turnips stashed in the root cellar. You might have some. Cheese, mouldy but edible. The real concern now is keeping the fire going through the night, because when it dies, it's like inviting the cold to take up residence in your ribs. You glance up at your cottage, your home, if you can call it that. It's a squat structure of wood, mud, and stubborn optimism. The roof is thatch, badly in need of patching. The walls are a quilt of timber and daub, which is a polite way of saying sticks smeared with mud and manure. The windows are just tiny slits, sometimes covered with oiled cloth or thin animal bladder to keep out the wind. But nothing keeps out all of it. The place is draftier than a barn with stage fright. Inside, there's a hearth that you and your family practically worship, because it's the only thing standing between you and the icy embrace of death. Smoke curls out from it, sometimes lazily, sometimes with a vengeful twist, depending on the mood of the chimney, which doesn't always feel like doing its job. When it clogs, which it does a lot, the whole place fills with smoke, and your eyes water like you've just been caught peeling onions with guilt. You might be thinking, well, at least there's firewood. Cute. You've been out in the woods all autumn hauling in everything that even vaguely resembled a stick. But you had to be careful. The Lord owns most of the forest. Technically, every branch, log and deadfall belongs to him. Taking wood without permission? That's poaching. Penalties range from fines to whippings to, yes, you guessed it, death. Because apparently dying of cold isn't dramatic enough. So you take what you can. Twigs, bark, dried animal dung, peat if you're near a bog. If you've got something a little more combustible, like birch or oak, you ration it like gold. Each log is worth more than most of your possessions, because without them, your house isn't a shelter. It's a tomb with a nice view of the snow. And the snow, it's not pretty. It's not soft. It falls wet and hard, then refreezes overnight, becoming a crusty, ankle-twisting enemy. It seeps in through every crack, and when the wind howls, it finds you. Inside your home, under your clothes, in your very bones. That's not poetic, that's just biology. Your body is working triple time just to keep your fingers from dying. And if you think layering helps, remember, clothing isn't exactly off the rack. You've got a homespun wool tunic, maybe some breeches, and a cloak that's been mended so many times it probably qualifies as a quilt. Fun fact, the term winter comes from an old word meaning time of water. And yeah, that checks out. Water in the form of ice, water in the form of sleet, water creeping through your boots because they're more holes than leather now. But here's something weird. Historians are still debating whether winters were really that much colder back then, or if it's just our modern climate bias kicking in. Some records talk about rivers freezing solid and wine turning to slush indoors. Others suggest people were just more sensitive because heating was, a bonfire and a prayer. There's even an ongoing academic argument about whether the so-called Little Ice Age started in the 1300s or earlier. Either way, you're freezing now, and the debate isn't going to keep your feet from turning blue. So what do? You hunker down, you bank the fire by covering the embers in ash, hoping it'll still be smouldering come morning. You pull your family close, real close. You all sleep in one bed, maybe on a straw mattress if you're lucky, or just on the floor near the fire. And yeah, the dog's in there too, and maybe a piglet or two. You're not being generous, you're being strategic. Every warm body helps. Tonight is just the first of many cold, sleepless, sniffly nights. You're going to survive it, barely. But winter is a long game, and this is only the opening move. You duck back inside, your fingers already numb despite being clenched into your cloak. The door doesn't quite fit the frame, hasn't in years, so even when it's shut, a thin stripe of moonlight and wind cuts across the packed earth floor. You shove a loose piece of cloth against the gap and kick it with your heel for good measure, even though you know it won't do much. The cold in here has its own personality. It slips under things, climbs over others, finds the holes, hugs the ground, and coils in the corners. And the worst offender? The walls. Wattle and daub. Sounds charming, right? Like something you'd buy at a fantasy-themed farmer's market. In reality, it's just woven twigs slathered in mud, straw and animal poop, dried to a crust, then forgotten about until the next rainstorm or hard freeze turns it into nature's own air conditioning system. It was cheap. It was easy. It was definitely not insulated. You can actually feel the air leaking through. Run your hand over the inside wall and the chill bites back. It's not just cold, it's damp. The kind of damp that gets into your chest and never quite leaves. Coughs echo inside your lungs longer in winter, bouncing around like bored spirits. You've known people, young, old, strong, stubborn, who just didn't wake up one morning. The fire had gone out. Their breath had stopped. That was it. There's a small window by the hearth, and by window, of course, we mean a hole with a strip of linen oiled to transparency and nailed over it like a bad idea someone once saw in a bigger village. It warps the moonlight into long, spooky streaks. The edges of the linen are crusted with frost. On the coldest nights, you'll scrape the inside, not the outside. And don't bother breathing on it to clear a view. Your breath just freezes instantly. You've learnt that the hard way, probably while checking to see if something, anything, was moving outside, or maybe just hoping to see signs that the snow's let up. Over in the corner, there's a low bed frame stuffed with hay, covered in a rough woolen blanket and a sheepskin that still smells faintly like its original owner. It creaks when you sit on it, the straw crackling beneath you like old paper. You've patched the holes in the blanket so many times it's more stitch than fabric now. When the wind picks up, it rattles the shutters and hisses between the wall slats like an angry ghost. You press your hands to the wall and imagine, for the 1000th time, what it would feel like if warmth came from it. Like magic. Like sin. In the evenings, after the chores are done and the daylight's drained from the sky, you and your family huddle here. The hearth is the only light source, flickering yellow and orange across soot-stained walls. There's no insulation, no stove, no coal heater. Just fire. If you're lucky, it burns clean. If you're not, and you usually aren't, the smoke creeps sideways, curling up into the thatch where it hangs like a lazy fog. Your eyes water constantly, your lungs ache, your snot freezes. But there's something almost cosy about this, in a very dark, very survivalist kind of way. The closeness, the shared misery, the scratchy sound of someone knitting in the corner, the smell of whatever's boiling in the pot. Spoiler, it's cabbage. It's always cabbage. You swap stories, whisper gossip, retell local legends for the 100th time. Sometimes you all sit in silence, just watching the fire. It's hypnotic, it's warmish, it's a lifeline. Here's the fringe fact of the night. Archaeologists have actually found scorch marks on the ancient medieval timbers, inside the houses, because people used to light small fires inside their beds. No chimney, no ventilation, just a bed box with a charcoal burner tucked under the blanket like a suicidal hot water bottle. It was called a bed warmer. You'd think they were setting themselves up for disaster, and they were. Every winter, some unlucky soul burned down their own cottage while trying not to freeze to death in it. Grim, but weirdly relatable. Meanwhile, the scholars, still arguing over how much of this setup was desperation versus design. Some believe that these cottages were built this poorly on purpose, under the idea that too much insulation would trap moisture and lead to rot. Others argue they just didn't have the means or the knowledge to do better. Could they have improved things with moss insulation? Probably. Did they? Not often enough. It's one of those maddening historical questions where the answer is buried under centuries of cold dirt and lost context. And then there's the roof. Oh, the roof, but we'll get to that soon. For now, you try to distract yourself with simple rituals. You wrap your feet in rags, you tuck your hands under your armpits, you lean toward the hearth and breathe in the smoke, pretending it's warmth. And when that fails, you grab the sheepskin, wrap it around your shoulders like a crumbling king's cloak and shuffle toward the bed frame. Sleep comes slowly in a room this cold. You lie there with your eyes open, staring at the rafters, counting creaks. Every now and then you hear a thud, a chunk of ice slipping from the thatch, or maybe a rat investigating your stored grain. You pull the covers higher and try to imagine a summer so hot that you begged for cool air. It seems like something out of a dream, like firewood that never runs out, or walls that keep the cold out, or boots that don't leak. You roll over, careful not to shift the blanket too much. Heat is precious, and once it's gone, it's gone. In the darkness, you listen to your family breathe. Their sleep is shallow. Everyone's always half awake in winter, just in case the fire goes out, just in case something cracks, just in case you don't wake up. Eventually your body surrenders, not to comfort, but to exhaustion. The wind howls, the fire flickers, and you fade into sleep with the cold pressed against your back like an unwanted lover. You wake with a start, not because of any noise, but because your nose feels like it's been dipped in ice water. You blink into the dark, and for a moment you think you've gone blind. But no, there's moonlight slanting in through the warped window covering, casting silvery shadows across the packed dirt floor. Your breath clouds before your face, thicker, now than it was when you fell asleep. That means the fire's almost out, or maybe it's already dead. You sit up slowly, careful not to pull the blankets away from the rest of the heap that is your family. Limbs tangled, bodies pressed like clothes in a drawer. You're all cocooned together in one lumpy bed. Your younger sibling is snoring, your father mutters something under his breath, and your mother's foot, ice cold, is wedged firmly between your knees. You grit your teeth and leave it there. Everyone's trying to steal warmth from everyone else, and there's no room for negotiation. Above you the thatched roof looms, barely visible. In the daytime you can see the gaps, small holes where the straw's thinning or missing entirely. At night, you feel the cold as it drifts down through those invisible cracks, descending like mist from the heavens. Thatched roofs were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be cheap and sort of functional. Mostly they were good at shedding rain, as long as they were thick enough and kept patched. But nobody patches roofs in winter. That's a job for spring, when the ice is gone and you can climb a ladder without turning into a medieval icicle. Still, you remember the last big rain, sometime back in October, when you woke to dripping directly on your forehead. A mouse had made a nest in the thatch and chewed a little tunnel all the way through. Water came pouring down like divine punishment, soaking your blanket and your patience. You had stuffed a wad of rags up there and hoped for the best. It's still there, holding on like a desperate bandage. Thatch isn't just straw, it's a whole micro-ecosystem. Mice, spiders, fleas, birds, all kinds of guests take up residence in that warm, decaying mess above your head. You've seen birds fly in and vanish into the roof like it's Narnia. On windy nights, the entire thing hisses and rustles, like a living thing scratching to get out. And when the snow gets heavy, you pray. You pray that the weight doesn't collapse the roof or send a soggy cascade of half-rotten straw down into your bed. It's happened before, not to you, but to the widow Gilda 3 cottages over. One night it was roof, the next it was sky, just like that. And fun fact, thatched roofs weren't just vulnerable to rain, they were also excellent kindling. A single ember popping too high from the hearth, and whoosh, the whole thing could go up in flames like a dry sponge. In some towns, regulations were eventually passed requiring chimneys instead of open hearths, but good luck enforcing those among the poor. Chimneys were for the gentry. You've got a hole in the roof and a bucket of hope. There's still some glow from the hearth. Not fire exactly, but embers, red and pulsing like the last heartbeat of a dying god. You shuffle over to it, blanket still wrapped around your shoulders like a sad cape, and you blow gently on the coals. A puff of ash rises, making your eyes sting. You add a twig. Nothing. Another. Then finally, the tiniest flicker of flame, the kind that feels like it's flirting with you. You feed it slowly, straw, dried moss, a sliver of bark, until the flame licks upward and casts dancing shadows on the walls. It's not warm, not yet, but it's alive. That's enough. Your breath still ghosts in the air, but at least now there's a focal point, something to gather around. You sit cross-legged and stretch your hands toward the flickering light, flexing your fingers slowly. They crack and ache, the cold having stiffened your joints overnight. In the corner, the family dog, some mutt with wiry hair and eternal fleas, shuffles toward the heat, circles once, then collapses like a soggy pillow. You consider curling up next to him, and probably will once your toes start complaining again. There's something oddly peaceful about these early hours before the rest of the house stirs. The silence is thick, except for the occasional pop from the fire, or a low grunt from the bed pile. Outside, the world is dead quiet. No carts, no bells, just wind and snow, maybe the distant cry of a fox or owl. In the dead of winter, the world shrinks down to the size of your home. The idea of travelling anywhere, especially on foot, feels like madness. Now here's the quirky bit. Some villagers used to believe that if your roof collected too much frost, it meant the household inside was cursed with cold-hearted people. No warmth inside, no warmth outside. Total nonsense, obviously, but you can bet people whispered about it. Auntie so-and-so hasn't had frost melt off her roof in days. Must be a witch. That kind of logic was deadly in the wrong crowd. As the fire grows, the smell of last night's stew still lingers. Onions, root vegetables, and something vaguely meaty. That, plus the permanent scent of smoke, wet wool, and humanity. It's a funk that you stop noticing after a while, like the noise of a mill or the sting of calluses. You just adapt. There's no bath coming to wash it away, no crisp linen sheet to fall into. This is your life, your bed, your roof, and it's barely holding together. There's another creak above you, probably the wind, or probably just the roof shifting, but your eyes flick upward anyway. Always watching, always wondering. Could it cave in tonight? Could it let in something worse than snow? Outside, the frost glows faintly in the pre-dawn light. The world is whitewashed, still, and utterly merciless. You hear your father stirring in the bed, coughing hard into the crook of his arm, that deep, wet sound you've heard all winter, maybe longer. Your mother murmurs something low, half asleep. Soon the day will start. Chores, wood collection, tending to what few animals haven't frozen to death. But right now, it's just you, the fire, and the slow groaning protest of a roof made of straw keeping the night barely at bay. You know what's worse than waking up in a freezing medieval cottage? Waking up in a freezing medieval cottage with nothing left to burn. That's your current dilemma. The small fire you coaxed into life with such gentle ceremony is already fading again. Like it's too tired to deal with this winter nonsense. It needs more fuel. The problem? Fuel doesn't grow on trees. Not ones you're allowed to touch anyway. You pull on your stiff boots, if you can call them that. More like stiffened sacks of leather that vaguely resemble footwear. The soles are cracked, the stitching is fraying, and there's a suspicious smell that suggests something once died inside one. But they're all you've got, and the frostbite nipping at your toes isn't exactly giving you a choice. You wrap your woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, pull your hood low, and brace yourself for the morning hunt. Not for food, those days are long past. For firewood, stepping outside is like walking into a slap. The wind hits your face with icy disdain of a disgruntled landlord. The ground crunches beneath your boots, ice and old snow, pocked with hoof prints and the frozen smears of things you'd rather not identify. The skies are dull, heavy grey, like wet wool stretched across the heavens. You can't see the sun, but you know it's somewhere up there, probably judging you. Most of the obvious wood sources were picked clean in late autumn. That's when the whole village turned into a desperate army of scavengers, combing the edges of the Lord's forest for anything that looked vaguely flammable. Fallen branches, dried pine cones, even brambles. If it burned, it was fair game. Or, well, unfair game, technically. The forest isn't yours. It belongs to the manor, and taking wood from it without permission is illegal. Not just frowned upon, punishable. You remember old Bert, bent nearly double with age, who lost an ear for sneaking out after dusk with a bundle of sticks under his cloak. You told yourself it wouldn't happen to you. You've become very good at lying to yourself. Today you stick closer to the edges of the common fields, scouring ditches and fence lines for dead twigs and wind-fallen limbs. It's slim pickings. You kick through a mound of snow and find a piece of half-rotted wood soaked through and about as flammable as a damp sponge. You pocket it anyway. Your standards have dropped dramatically. There's also the fuel nobody talks about, at least not proudly. Dried animal dung. It's called cow chips in some places, field pies in others. You've burned your fair share of them. If you close your eyes and squint your nose, it smells almost like wood. Almost. You find a few hardened lumps near the edge of the animal pens and scoop them into your sack. At this point, you're not chasing heat, you're chasing survival, and dignity was sacrificed 3 winters ago. A strange little fringe fact here. Some regions, especially up in the moors, relied heavily on peat, spongy plant matter dug up from bogs, dried in the sun and burned like coal. It gave off a long, smoky heat and could be stockpiled, but if you didn't live near a peat bog, you were out of luck. Peat was nature's privilege, and not everyone got an invitation. You return home with a bundle that looks and smells like the world's worst party gift. But it'll burn, sort of. You jam the door closed behind you and drop the frozen treasures by the hearth. The fire's down to an orange glow now, barely warm enough to toast a flea. You kneel, grab the driest stick and feed it in. The flame catches. Not fast, but enough to pull a breath of relief from your chest. You add a few cow chips and brace yourself for the slow, bitter perfume that follows. It fills the room like a wet sock in a hot pan, acrid and earthy, the scent of desperation rendered airborne. Your little brother groans and covers his head with a corner of the blanket. Your mother mutters something about the old days when your grandfather had real wood. You all pretend not to notice the smell anymore. Now, the scholars still debate whether the scarcity of firewood was constant or seasonal. Some say it varied wildly from village to village, depending on how tightly the local lord controlled the forests. Others argue that peasant families always had some kind of fuel stash, even if it was just old fencing, broken tools, or splinters from that one stool nobody liked anyway. There are stories, maybe half exaggerated, maybe not, about families burning entire sections of their own homes to stay alive. Doors, bed frames, cartwheels. When the frost crept too far into the bones, sentiment didn't stand a chance. You glance at your own furniture. Not much there. A lopsided stool, a crude table, and the ball. The bed is sacred. The rest, questionable. You've seen the dog eyeing the stool like it might collapse on its own if you just sneezed at it. Give it another week of deep freeze and you might turn it into kindling without a second thought. Outside, the wind howls through the cracks in the walls, sneaking under the door like a thief with icy fingers. The fire snaps and pops, and for a brief moment, the room almost feels tolerable. You settle near the hearth, pull the blanket up to your chin, and try to warm your toes by sheer willpower. Your father starts coughing again. He wraps his cloak tighter and motions toward the sack. "Any more?" he asks, already knowing the answer. You shake your head. He grunts, not angry, just resigned. That's how everyone sounds in winter. Resigned. Like you're waiting in a long line for spring and no one's sure if the booth will ever open. The fire cracks louder now, licking at a soggy pine cone that's releasing a burst of sap with a weird little whistle. You lean closer, let the warmth sink into your cheeks, and allow yourself 5 minutes of peace. That's about how long it lasts before someone mentions needing to go back out later. Or wood. Always more wood. Because if the fire dies completely, so do you. At some point during the short grey afternoon, the wind outside picks up again, sharp, bitter, and loud enough to whistle through every gap in the wall, the roof, even the floorboards. It moans like a hungry beast circling your cottage. You know that sound well. It's the voice of winter itself reminding you how flimsy your shelter is. The sun's nowhere to be seen, but you feel the light fading, and that tells you everything you need to know. It's almost night again. Time to crawl into the one place in this entire world that pretends to offer warmth. The bed box. Calling it a bed box is generous. It's more like a wooden closet with a mattress shoved inside and a pair of swinging doors that kind of close but mostly creak in protest. Still, it's where you sleep. Every single night. Shoulder to shoulder, knee to back, breath to nose, with your entire family. There are 6 of you, and no, the bed is not designed for 6. It's designed for don't die of frostbite and not much else. Tonight, like every winter night, you go through the same quiet ritual. First, you peel off your cloak and hang it near the fire to dry, though it never really dries. Then you slip into your sleeping shift, usually just a long wool tunic that's stiff in places and threadbare in others. Socks stay on if you have them. If you're lucky, the rags you wrapped your feet in this morning haven't frozen solid. The bed already smells like sweat, smoke and damp straw. It's a scent you associate with safe, though nothing about it really is. Climbing into the bed box is like squeezing yourself into a puzzle. Your older brother's legs are already sprawled across the foot, your little sister has hogged most of the middle, and your parents are curled up like parentheses on either side. You wedge yourself in, contorting just enough to find a space where your ribs aren't poking someone else's spine. It's tight, cramped, and every movement risks triggering a chain reaction of groans, coughs and elbows. But here's the thing. This mess of limbs and body heat is your only real defense against the cold. The walls won't stop it. The fire won't reach this far. But huddled together in this human nest, nasaui, you generate a sort of ambient warmth. Shared, imperfect but crucial. In the dead of winter, nothing is more valuable than another warm body beside you. Fun fact, box beds like these were actually common in colder parts of Europe. Scotland, the Low Countries, parts of France. And yes, families really did sleep in them together, often behind a curtain or a set of wooden doors to trap heat. It wasn't just for warmth, either. It offered a sliver of privacy in a one-room house, though calling it privacy when your feet are in someone's face is a stretch. You've got more intimacy with your brother's toenails than most married couples. Some people had to sleep on the floor near the fire instead, especially if the family was large, or if the bed box was in use by the elders or the infants. That might sound like an advantage, more space, closer to the heat. But remember, the fire dies, and floors are cold, hard and full of surprises. Rats, for example. You've seen them scurry past more than once, bold as bandits. And let's not talk about what happens if someone gets up in the night to relieve themselves and misses the chamber pot. You pull the sheepskin over yourself and try not to think about how much it smells like wet barn. Someone lets out a sneeze, another cough. A foot twitches near your ribs. You lie there, eyes open, adjusting to the dark and the sounds of your family settling in. The wind slams against the shutters like it wants in. You tighten the blanket around your shoulders and exhale slowly, letting the heat of your breath warm the tiny space in front of your face before it's whisked away. Now here's a hot little scholarly debate. Did peasants really always sleep this way? Entire families mashed into one bed like pickled herring? Some historians argue that yes, absolutely, it was the norm in winter. Others say that sleeping patterns varied widely depending on the size of the family, the structure of the home, and even local customs. In some regions, servants and children slept in separate lofts or annexes, leaving the parents alone in the main bed. But in the deep of winter, when death was just a cracked window away, you didn't care about privacy, you cared about body heat. You shift again, trying to ease the pressure on your hip where it's jammed against a wooden beam. Your sister mumbles something in her sleep and punches your arm. You nudge her foot out of your face and tuck your own arms tightly across your chest. This is the position you'll maintain for the next 8 to 10 hours, or until your leg falls asleep, or until the fire goes out and you have to get up and rekindle it with the last of your cow dung and dignus. The bed creaks with every breath. The walls groan in response to the wind. You can hear the dog sigh heavily near the hearth. You try not to think about the fact that you'll be up before dawn, hauling buckets, gathering twigs, possibly digging out the door if the snow drifts too high. But for now, you let your eyes close. Maybe you'll dream of summer, of lying in a sun-warmed field, the grass soft beneath you, the air buzzing with bees. Maybe you'll dream of bread that doesn't go stale, or boots that don't leak, or having a bed all to yourself. Or maybe you won't dream at all, just the numb, flickering darkness of winter sleep. Whatever comes, you'll face it together, jammed elbow to rib in this wooden box of humanity, breathing in unison against a world that would rather see you frozen. You wake before the sun again, though wake might be too strong a word. It's more like you do gradually become aware that your eyes are open and your limbs are sore and your face feels like it's been left in a snowbank overnight. Inside the bedbox, the air is stale and sharp, the kind of cold that clings to your skin even under layers of wool and sheepskin. You try to move, but there's a weight on your leg. Your sister still dead asleep, her feet wedged between your knees like she owns the joint. You nudge her off gently and crawl toward the edge of the bed, joints cracking like ancient timber. The floor is ice, literal ice. You step out and instantly regret it, your feet swearing an oath of vengeance against the ancestors who didn't invent slippers. You reach for your clothes, wool tunic, breeches, a second tunic that barely qualifies as warm, and begin the slow layering process. Everything's stiff, a little damp and vaguely smoky from hanging too close to the hearth, but it's better than bare skin, which would probably just snap off at this point. There's no mirror, but if there were, you'd see a walking patchwork of wool, leather, and exhausted eyebrows. Medieval winter fashion for peasants isn't about style, it's about survival. Your shirt is made of coarse homespun wool, the colour of old porridge. Over that goes a sleeveless wool overdress, or tunic, depending on your gender and what's available. Then comes the cloak, a heavy thing with a hood, clasped at the neck with a bit of twine and hope. No buttons, no zippers, just layers on layers. If you have a belt, you cinch it tight. If not, you just pretend it's fashionably oversized. And let's talk about underthings, or the lack thereof. Linen, the fabric of underclothes and luxury, is rare and expensive. You might own a single shift, or you might have to go without. Socks, maybe. Wool foot wraps, more likely. Strips of cloth you wind around your feet and hope they stay in place longer than an hour. Gloves? Ha! More like mittens if you're lucky, and even then they're fingerless. You get used to your fingertips going numb. Eventually. The fringe bit of clothing you're weirdly grateful for? Sheepskin. Not tanned, not processed. Just the actual pelt of a sheep, thrown over your shoulders or sewn into a crude vest. It smells like, well, a sheep, but it keeps the wind off your spine and traps the body heat that would otherwise leak out through your thin, resentful wool. There's also a weird fringe trend that has been debated among historians. People in colder regions sometimes wore moss or hay stuffed into their clothes for extra insulation. Not elegant, not hygienic, but if you were trudging through snowdrifts and all you had was a single tunic and no working feeling in your toes, you might start considering a handful of dry straw down your pants. Practicality over pride always. Back by the hearth, your mother's already up, blowing on the embers, her face wrapped in a cloth to keep the morning chill from cutting into her cheeks. She's wearing the same shapeless layers she's worn all week, with the addition of a wool kerchief tied tight over her hair. She doesn't look at you, just nods like, "Yes, we're doing this again." She stirs the stew pot, the same one from yesterday and the day before. Perpetual stew, a medieval classic. You keep the pot going, add scraps when you have them, water when it's low, bones if you're lucky. It never really ends, just simmers and mutates like some broth-based religion. You hunch near the fire with your bowl and inhale the steam. It smells earthy and vaguely sour, like roots, old cabbage, maybe a trace of salted pork from last week's miracle. You eat fast, not because you're hungry, though you are, but because the bowl warms your hands and fogs up your nose, and for 5 glorious minutes, you feel almost human. You glance around the room. Everyone's in their layers now, moving like bundled shadows. The dog is licking its paw in front of the fire, smug in its ability to grow its own fur coat. Your father wraps a length of coarse linen around his head like a makeshift scarf and mutters something about chopping kindling. Your brother's pulling his boots on with the same grimace he uses for dental pain and church. Here's a strange historical detail. Some peasants actually slept in their day clothes, every layer they owned, just to avoid putting them on in the morning. Made sense. Why change into something cold when you could suffer less? But if your clothes got wet during the day, through snow, rain or misfortune, you had to peel them off or risk freezing overnight. And putting them back on in the morning? Imagine climbing into a bucket of slush and asking it to hug you. That's what it felt like. The scholars argue about whether layering wool was as effective as modern clothing tech. Probably not. But wool's weird. It keeps insulating even when wet. It smells like wet goat, sure, but it works. So you pile it on, move around constantly, and hope your body heat doesn't escape faster than you can generate it. You finish your meal and rub your hands over the fire again. Outside, the light is a little stronger, casting pale rays through the frosted cloth over the window. The wind hasn't let up. You can hear it pulling at the corners of the cottage like it's trying to peel the place open. You check the door frame, still holding, for now. Your mother hands you a scarf, more of a rag really, and you tie it over your mouth and nose. The air outside is sharp enough to steal your breath, and you've learnt the hard way that bare skin in the wind is an invitation to regret. You grab your basket and your hatchet and head for the door. You pause before opening it, staring at the bundled figures around the hearth. Everyone has the same expression, tired, braced, hollow-eyed, but determined. Winter doesn't get easier. You just get better at faking strength. You pull the door open and step out into the white. The cold hits you like a sack of stones soaked in sleet. You squint into the wind, eyes instantly tearing up, though the tears freeze at the corners before they can fall. Your scarf helps a little, but not enough. It's like trying to fend off a bear with a polite suggestion. The snow is knee-deep in places now, with patches of crusted ice that breaks suddenly underfoot, turning every step into a gamble. The sky is iron grey, thick with clouds that promise more punishment before the day is out. But you're not here for the view. You're here for food. You make your way to the communal cooking shed, really just a lean-to with stone walls and a sagging roof. Inside, the air is almost tolerable, at least compared to the outside. This is where the stew lives. The stew. Perpetual, sacred, almost mystical in its longevity. You lift the heavy wooden lid of the pot that hangs above a low flame and are immediately greeted by the unmistakable scent of survival. Onions, turnip, a bit of barley, and something that might have once been meat. It's hard to tell. Everything's been boiled into soft anonymity. This stew has been going for days, maybe weeks, no one's quite sure anymore. It's topped up regularly with whatever can be found, boiled bones, old cabbage, even bread crusts if someone's feeling fancy. Every villager contributes to it when they can, which means it's a blend of generosity and desperation, stirred into something vaguely nourishing. You ladle some into a wooden bowl and breathe it in. It's not delicious, but it's hot, and hot is enough. You sit on a low stool by the wall and eat quickly, eyes closed, savouring the warmth it sends through your chest. Around you others are doing the same, familiar hunched shapes in heavy layers, spooning down mouthfuls of peasant magic. There's a strange comfort to it, a ritual. Everyone knows that the stew isn't about flavour, it's about calories and heat. It's about the simple fact that warm food helps you hold on just a little longer. You're not alone either. This kind of perpetual stew, sometimes called eternal pot, was a common strategy across medieval Europe. In colder regions especially, the hearth never went cold and the stew never truly ended. One pot, one fire, dozens of meals. The meat's a rare treat. If there's any in today's bowl, it's probably something small, a squirrel, a bird, maybe even a sliver of salted pork from a family who had a pig to spare. Mostly you're eating roots, carrots, turnips, onions, parsnips, things that grow underground and don't spoil quickly. The texture's soft, the flavour earthy. Every now and then someone adds herbs, dried nettles if they cover them. Maybe a pinch of salt if they're really daring. But spices? That's comedy. Those are for nobility and spice merchants. You're lucky if your stew doesn't taste like boiled wool and tears. Quirky fact of the night. Some villages had stew pots that literally never stopped, passed down from one generation to the next. A kind of edible inheritance. There are stories, half folklore, half truth, of pots kept going for decades, always warm, always fed. One French village reportedly had a stew that lasted centuries, with locals joking that some of the original meat was probably still in there. Gross, maybe, but comforting in a weird ancestral way. A shared broth of memory and survival. You scrape your bowl clean and wipe your mouth with the sleeve of your cloak. No one bothers with napkins. You nod to the others and step outside again, the wind slapping your skin like it missed you. The stew's warmth is already fading from your stomach, but you tuck the memory of it inside you like a secret. You'll need it tonight. Back at your cottage, the sun's already thinking about quitting for the day, and it's not even late afternoon. Winter robs you of time. It's always pushing you toward dusk, toward firelight, toward another long stretch of darkness. But before night falls, there's one more task, checking the supplies. You duck into the little root cellar near your home, a pit dug into the ground and covered with planks, straw and a wooden hatch that creaks like an old man's knees. Inside it's even colder than outside, but at least the wind can't reach you. Your breath fogs instantly as you check your stores. A few shriveled carrots, some turnips with sprouting tops, a handful of onions and half a wheel of cheese that smells like betrayal. There's a bundle of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and in the corner, a cloth-wrapped bundle of precious dried beans. You nod, half pleased. It's not a feast, but it's enough. For now. You haul the vegetables up into the house and toss a few into the pot by the fire. Let it simmer all night. Let it do what it's meant to do. Be there, constant and humble, waiting to warm you again tomorrow. The pot hisses and bubbles, the scent of onion and garlic curling into the air like a lullaby. It'll taste better by morning, you tell yourself. It always does. The longer it cooks, the more everything softens. The more the flavours marry, the more you believe the lie that this stew is good, that it's fine, that you're fine. And here's where the scholars can't quite agree. Was stew the primary winter food for most peasants, or was it just one of many survival meals? Some argue that porridge played just as central a role, especially in regions with reliable grain stores. Others think stew was king, especially in forested areas, where wild greens, roots and small game were common additions. What everyone agrees on, though, is that hot food meant hope. As long as the pot bubbled, life could continue. You crouch near the hearth again, watching the fire dance beneath the pot. Your hands hover above the flames, your face tingling from the change in temperature. Behind you, your family settles in, one by one, drawing closer to the fire. The stew gurgles softly, a slow, steady heartbeat that reminds you, this night will be cold, but not empty. You know that warm, sleepy feeling you get when you've just had a hot meal and the fire's burning low, and for one luxurious second you think, maybe tonight won't be so bad? Yeah, that's cute, but that's not how winter works. Because just as you're settling into that brief moment of comfort, something rustles behind the wall. Not a big rustle, just a little one, like claws on wood. Then another, then a soft patter, followed by a squeak. And you remember, with a soul-deep sigh, that you are not the only one who's trying to survive winter in this cottage, not by a long shot. Welcome to the medieval peasants' winter roommates. Mice, lice, and every creeping thing that decided your cottage looked better than freezing to death outside. They're not guests, they live here. You're the guest, you just pay rent in soup steam and body heat. You peer at the wall where the sound came from, but of course there's nothing to see. That's the beauty of mice. They're fast, discreet, and always slightly out of sight. You know they're behind the wattle and daub. Probably a whole family of them curled up in a nest made of stolen wool, hay, and whatever bits of food they've scavenged from your kitchen floor. You used to try to trap them, but you've made a quiet peace now. They don't bite. They don't scream, and in some strange way they're kind of comforting. Like, if the mice can survive this cold, maybe you can too. Lice, though, different story. Those guys are the worst. Nocturnal, relentless, and surprisingly democratic. Everyone gets lice. Nobles get them, priests get them, your entire family gets them, but peasants, you get the full buffet. Body lice, head lice, maybe even a flea or two if your dog's been generous. You try to keep them under control. Combs, ash, vinegar rinses. But in winter, with no chance of a real wash, you're fighting a war you can't win. You scratch the back of your neck automatically and roll your eyes at yourself. It's fine. It's normal. You once heard a village elder say that if you didn't wake up itchy, you were probably dead. Funny how your standards adjust. And then there are the bedfellows no one invites, but you just can't get rid of. Spiders in the corners, beetles under the floorboards, particularly smug centipede that's taken up residence behind the hearth and emerges only when you're alone and contemplating your life choices. Every creak and skitter is a reminder that this cottage is more alive than it looks. But some of these creatures aren't just freeloaders. They're also, weirdly, part of the ecosystem. Mice, for instance, often keep worse pests away, like rats. Rats are bold, and they bite. You've heard stories of babies being nibbled in their sleep. Food spoiled, clothes chewed. Mice might steal your grain, but rats go for your soul. So you learn to tolerate the tiny squeakers in exchange for keeping the big bads at bay. You glance at the fire. It's still going for now. The stew pot bubbles gently. Your parents have already nodded off, curled near the hearth, cloaked in a shared blanket. Your siblings are half asleep in the bedbox, limbs sprawled like lazy starfish. You should join them, but the rustling keeps coming, and you can't help but listen. Here's a fringe fact. Some medieval folks actually believed that lice were a kind of punishment from God, either for sin or simply as a reminder of humility. Others, more creatively, claimed they were born from sweat and filth. Not wrong, technically. Still, it led to some truly bizarre remedies, like pressing warm garlic between your shoulder pieces, or wearing a small pouch of fox hair under your tunic to confuse the fleas. You once tried the garlic thing. Your sister refused to sleep near you for 3 nights, probably worth it. Scholars still debate just how bad the infestation problem was for peasants. Some claim it was constant and intense, especially during winter, when cleaning was difficult and warmth invited all sorts of uninvited guests. Others argue that medieval hygiene wasn't as horrifying as we imagine, that people combed regularly, changed clothes more often than we give them credit for, and even had communal bathhouses in some towns. But you're not in a town. You're in a hut with a dirt floor, no bath, and a strong case of everyone's itchy. You toss another scrap into the fire and try to ignore the tingling on your scalp that's probably psychological but might not be. The stew smells stronger now, rich with onion and thyme. You wonder if the mice can smell it too, probably. They're smarter than they look. You've seen one dart across the floor like it had errands to run. It even paused halfway to groom itself, completely unbothered by your towering presence. One of your siblings lets out a long sigh in their sleep. The dog twitches its paw and yips quietly. The fire cracks like it's trying to whisper something ancient. You pull your cloak tighter around you and lie back against the wall. It's cold but solid. You can feel the heartbeat of the house, the settling of timbers, the wind against the thatch, the low sounds of other lives inside your walls. And here's a detail that always gives you pause. Some people believe that keeping animals, even pests, inside the house during winter wasn't just a necessity. It was a blessing. The movement, the breath, the small warmth they added could mean the difference between life and death. A mouse nest in the wall, free insulation, a dog at your feet, personal furnace, a cat on your lap, status symbol and rodent control. So maybe that scuttling sound behind the hearth isn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe it's just winter's way of reminding you that you're not alone, even in the bleakest dark. Eventually you stand, stretch and step toward the bed box. Someone's already stolen your spot, of course, so you wedge in at a new angle, careful not to wake the whole system. A draft slips down the back of your neck as you settle in. The fire pops again. The mouse squeaks once and falls silent. You close your eyes. Tomorrow it starts all over again. But for now, you've got stew in your belly, a roof over your head, and the strangely comforting company of fur, feet, and fleas. You wake before the fire dies completely, stirred from your cramped sleep by a soft, wet sound just beyond the wall. At first, you think it's the wind again, pushing through the thatch with a bored kind of violence. But then you hear it. Something heavier, breathing, snorting. You freeze. Not from fear exactly, but recognition. It's just the cow. Yes, you share your cottage with a cow. Maybe a goat, a piglet, or a few chickens too. Depends on the season and how lucky or desperate you are. You can't afford to let them stay out in the barn during winter. If you even have a barn, it's usually a loose lean-to stacked with hay and resentment, not exactly windproof. In deep winter, the animals come inside. They huddle in a pen at the far end of the room, separated from your sleeping space by a low wooden partition or, in some cases, absolutely nothing. You sleep within mooing distance of a full-grown, flatulent beast. But here's the wild part. It actually helps. The cow's body radiates heat like a wool-covered stove, same with pigs. Chickens aren't as effective, but they do a decent job of warming up the floorboards and scratching away the silence. That corner of the house might smell like a barnyard, because it is, but the warmth it provides is nothing short of miraculous. You roll over now, wrapping your cloak tighter, and thinking how weird it is that your pillow is basically a cabbage sack, your blanket smells like a damp sheep, and your heating system moos in its sleep. But this is normal. This is smart. You stretch a little and listen as your father rises. He grunts as he pulls on his boots and stumbles toward the animal pen, mumbling greetings to the livestock like they're co-workers he barely tolerates. "Morning, girl," he says to the cow, patting her flank. "Still breathing? That's good. Don't die on us today." She flicks her ears, unimpressed. He checks her water bucket, frozen solid. Of course, he sighs and hauls it toward the hearth to thaw. Fun fringe fact. In some medieval villages, it wasn't just peasants who did this. Even wealthier households would bring animals into the lower level of their homes in winter, especially in regions like the Alps or Scandinavia. In some cases, the living quarters were above the animals, letting heat rise naturally. Picture that, your bedroom over a giant bovine furnace. Charming, if a bit noisy. Your father kicks the pig awake gently. It grunts, blinks at him, then rolls over like it's not taking requests right now. The chickens are still roosting on a shelf by the door, their feathers fluffed into tight balls. You stare at them from the bedbox and wonder, not for the first time, if you'll end up eating one before the month is out. Not that there's much meat on them, but winter makes you rethink everything. Scholars still debate whether bringing animals inside was standard across all regions, or more of a survival tactic used during unusually cold periods. Some say it was an act of desperation. Others argue it was deliberate and clever, an early form of thermal regulation in buildings that lacked insulation. Either way, it blurs the line between home and barn in a way that modern minds would find horrifying. But you just call it winter. You finally roll out of bed, careful not to step on the dog who's taken up residence just outside the fire circle. He lifts his head lazily as you move past and licks his nose. Not exactly volunteering for guard duty. The air inside is sharp but not freezing. That's the magic of the livestock, breathing, snorting, farting central heating. You grab the small wooden shovel and head outside to fetch more frozen water from the well. The wind is relentless today, dragging ice crystals sideways through the air, painting everything with a shimmer of frost. Your cloak snaps behind you like a sail as you trudge through the drifted snow. The well is crusted with ice, the rope frozen stiff, the bucket clinking with thin layers of rime. It takes several sharp knocks and a lot of muttered curses to fill your bucket. Your fingers go numb instantly. You shuffle back inside, past the dog, past the chickens, past the pig, and set the bucket by the fire to thaw. The cow shifts and lets out a long, dramatic sigh. You kind of feel that. By mid-morning, the house smells like wet fur, smoke and onion broth. Your mother is already slicing vegetables into the stew, which has thickened into something halfway between soup and glue. It sticks to your ribs, she says. That's good, you'll need it for chores. But before you go, you crouch beside the cow, holding your palms out to the patch of warmth that wafts from her side. She smells like hay and manure, but she's alive, and right now, that's the only requirement. The dog curls beside her, tucking his nose into her flank like a child burrowing into a parent's lap. The pig's snoring now, little grunts and wheezes that echo through the rafters. You lean against the cow's side just for a second and close your eyes. Here's a quirky truth. In some regions, people even talk to their animals during winter. Not just commands, but full conversations. It wasn't just out of boredom. There was a deep belief in the sacredness of animals, their loyalty, their closeness to God or nature or something in between. In some households, animals were part of blessings, rituals, even confessions. It's not hard to imagine. In a world this bleak, a warm, blinking, breathing creature feels like a miracle. Especially one that doesn't judge your patchy socks or stew obsession. You sit a moment longer, until your father yells that the fire's dying again, and it's your turn to find more fuel. You groan, push yourself up and head back toward the door, brushing past the cow's nose as you go. She gives you a half-lidded blink, like, yeah, me too, and then she's already back to chewing whatever hay survived the frost. Out you go again, into the wind, into the grey, into another day of scrounging, chopping and freezing. But this time you carry a little bubble of warmth with you. Not from a hearth, not from a blanket, but from the memory of standing beside something alive, something breathing, something warm. In winter, that's everything. The wind outside has a rhythm now, a steady pulsing breath that hammers the walls like some invisible smith is shaping the sky. It's not just cold anymore, it's loud. It howls through the slats in the shutters, scrapes against the thatch and screeches down the chimney when it's feeling dramatic. You try to ignore it, but it presses on your ears like guilt. The sun hasn't come up all the way, but the darkness never really left. In winter, daylight doesn't arrive, it just flickers in like a dying candle and then scuttles away before supper. You're out gathering sticks again, bent double, nose dripping, breath curling into the air like you're exhaling ghosts. You've learned to listen closely in this kind of cold, not just for cracking branches or falling snow, but for other things. Because as much as people talk about hunger and frostbite, it's the nights that really get to you. The fear, the stories, the things you can't see but definitely feel watching from the edge of the woods. Every village has its winter tales. You know them by heart because you've been hearing them since you were old enough to shiver. Stories whispered by your grandmother while she mended cloaks near the fire. Tales told in low voices on nights when the wind sounded like crying. This is when the old ghosts come out, she said. When the veil thins, when the beasts of winter come walking. You feel it now as you walk back toward the cottage, sack of twigs slung over your shoulder, eyes flicking toward the tree line. Nothing moves, but that's the point. It's too still. Even the birds are quiet. You grip the hatchet tighter. Back inside, the fire's barely breathing. You toss a few twigs in and blow gently until the flames lick up again, stretching long fingers across the soot-blackened stones. The room brightens just enough to chase the edges of darkness from the corners, but the stories cling to you like smoke. You can still hear your grandmother's voice, raspy and full of drama. She used to talk about the winter hag, a bent old creature with eyes like frostbite and fingers sharp enough to carve ice from your bones. She wanders the countryside in snowstorms, your grandmother warned, looking for houses where the fire has died. If she finds one cold and silent, she slips in and keeps it that way. You swore once you heard her outside, tapping at the shutters, dragging her nails along the doorframe. Your father laughed. Then he banked the fire higher. You sit near the hearth now and glance toward the tiny, crooked window. The wind flings powdery snow against it like a tantrum. You pull your cloak tighter and try to remember if you banked the fire properly last night. If she finds the hearth cold, she comes in. You poke the embers again, just to be sure. It's not just the hag. There's also the black dog, a spectral beast with glowing eyes that prowls the roads at night. You've never seen it, but once your uncle came back from a walk after dusk, shaking and pale, and he never took the same path again. Some say it guards treasure, others say it's death in disguise. Either way, you don't walk alone in winter unless you have to. And then there are the Snow Whites, spirits made of snow and breath and sorrow, born from people who froze alone in the woods. They don't speak, they just watch. If you stare too long into the trees, sometimes you see shapes, tall and pale, swaying gently like dancers you can't quite remember. You've seen something like that once, maybe twice, or maybe you dreamed it. It's hard to say. Winter blurs the edges of everything. Your mother doesn't like these stories, says they spook the children and keep them from sleeping. But your father insists they serve a purpose. Fear, he says, is just another kind of caution. You used to think he was being dramatic. Then you found rabbit tracks circling your front door without ever approaching it, and that night, the fire refused to light. Quirky fact, many medieval households used charms to keep the winter spirits at bay. Herbs hung above the door, iron nails hammered into the frame, symbols carved into the beams. Some even kept bundles of twigs, birch, rowan or ash under the bed, believed to ward off the evil that came creeping in during the long nights. You've got a small carved charm hanging above your window shaped like a sun. You touch it now just to feel the worn grooves under your fingers. It doesn't keep out the cold, but it helps. And the scholars? Oh, they love to debate whether these stories were superstition, metaphor, or straight-up fear management. Some say they were moral lessons wrapped in frost and drama. Don't let the fire go out becomes a tale of death with a crooked back and icy breath. Others think it was just a way to keep kids indoors after dark. But here's the thing. When it's past midnight, the fire is dying and something creaks in the rafters. You're not thinking about metaphor. You're thinking about whether that noise is the wind or something older. A half-burnt stick from yesterday. You blow gently on the flickering spark, and after what feels like years, it catches. Flame. Small, fragile, but real. You sit back and exhale, relieved. Round one goes to you. Your sister is still asleep, her breathing thin but steady. Her fever has broken during the night, leaving her pale and soaked with sweat. Your mother wipes her brow with a damp rag, muttering soft thanks to saints you've never met. You catch her slipping a small token, a wooden cross carved from ash beneath the blanket, just in case. You know what she's thinking. You're thinking it too. Some people don't wake up after nights like that. It happens more than anyone talks about. A man falls asleep near the fire and doesn't rise. A baby goes quiet in the night and never stirs again. You heard about a family 2 villages over who lost 3 children in one winter. No disease, just cold, that's all it takes. And yet morning comes, and with it, the rituals. The fire is revived, the stew is reheated, the animals are stirred and fed. Life resumes, grim but determined. You drink your share of the broth, which tastes stronger today. Maybe someone slipped in the last bit of dried meat, or maybe you're just grateful to be awake. You stretch your limbs, wincing as blood flows back into places that had started to go numb. You step outside to relieve yourself in the pit, shivering the whole way. The snow is crunchy underfoot, and the sky is blank and grey, like parchment waiting for bad news. No birds, no sun, just stillness and breath. You don't linger, the toilet trench is as unforgiving as ever. Back inside, you sit by the hearth and thaw your hands. The dog rests beside you, steaming faintly from the warmth of the fire. He's snoring with purpose. You envy his ability to sleep through everything. Storms, howling winds, human death of suffering. Your little brother mumbles that he dreamed of spring again. Fields of grass, buzzing bees, sun on his face. It's a popular fantasy this time of year. Everyone's dreaming of spring, but not everyone makes it there. You give him a lopsided smile and say, "I dreamed of bread that doesn't smell like smoke." He laughs, then coughs. You look around the cottage and take stock. The walls are damp again, the frost creeping back in now that the fire's catching up. The window covering is stiff with ice, The stew pot is down to a quarter full, but your sister's alive, the fire is burning, you're breathing. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some medieval villagers believed that waking up after the fire went out meant you were protected by a guardian spirit. Others thought it was a sign you had unfinished business on Earth. Either way, surviving a fireless night was more than luck. It was a kind of weird badge of honour. You'd beat the odds, cheated the frost, stared down the void, and come back with all your toes intact, probably. And here's where the scholars bicker. Some argue that fire management was such a crucial part of daily life that entire families were trained to keep it alive at all times, passing down tricks like covering embers with ash to preserve heat overnight. Others think the high mortality in winter proves those methods didn't always work. In truth, it was a mix of skill, materials, and sheer stubbornness. Some nights you won, some nights you didn't. You start preparing the next meal, what's left of the root cellar offerings, a bit of stale grain, maybe some herbs. It's not much, but the trick is pretending it is. You hum a little while you stir just to keep your mind off how thin the broth looks. Your mother hands you a wooden spoon and a look that says she's proud of you. Or tired. Or both. The fire burns brighter now, the crackling louder. Light dances on the soot-stained walls and warms the backs of your hands. You hold them up and watch the pink creep back into your skin. You're thawing slowly like something buried too long in ice. It feels like coming back to life. Outside, the wind picks up again. You hear it whistle through the trees, pushing against the shutters with a half-hearted moan. But inside you've got stew, fire, and the sound of your sister's breathing. You made it to morning, and that's no small thing. Midday brings no sun, just a brighter kind of grey. You open the cottage door to find the world outside had transformed yet again. Snow higher than your boots, ice clinging to the eaves like someone dragged the whole sky through a wash basin and forgot to wring it out. Everything's frozen. The bucket of water left near the threshold is a solid block. The woodpile is buried. The path to the barn, what little remains of it, has vanished entirely. You take one look and know the fields are locked. Winter has seized the land like a miser, clamping a fist over coins. Your father squints at the horizon, then grunts the way men do when they realise everything they need to survive is trapped under 2 feet of frost and wishful thinking. He leans on his axe and mutters, "Nothing grows in a grave." It's a cheery sort of metaphor, but it fits. The earth is dead. You feel it in your feet. Farming stops in winter, not just slows down, it ceases. There's no ploughing, no sowing, no weeding. What's done is done. And if you didn't store enough in autumn, well, that's a you problem. Right now, the fields that fed you are nothing but a pale wasteland, wind-scoured and silent. You glance out at them and feel like you're staring at the surface of the moon. You could walk to the middle and vanish, swallowed by a snowdrift or just the sheer emptiness of it. This morning, your brother went to the grain shed with high hopes and came back shaking his head. Mice. Again. They've chewed through another sack, leaving behind neat little piles of husk and judgment. You had 6 sacks in autumn. Now you've got 4, and you're not even halfway through winter. Your mother cursed, your father went quiet, and you all stood there for a few moments, feeling that deep collective chill that has nothing to do with weather. Even the animals are starting to feel it. The cow's milk is drying up less each day, and the chickens have stopped laying. Your one remaining pig spends most of its time curled in the straw, groaning softly, probably dreaming of being someone else's problem. You know that look, you have it too. To keep the fire going, you're burning things that weren't supposed to be firewood. The last of the cart axle, a broken stool, your brother's wooden toy, the one shaped like a fox. He cried when it went in. You didn't stop him, the fire needed it more. Inside the cottage, the air smells like desperation. Or maybe that's just boiled turnip again. Your mother's working magic with what's left in the root cellar, turning thin vegetables into something that pretends to be a stew. You help, chopping carrots so rubbery they bend before they break. You toss them into the pot and don't say anything when your stomach growls. Everyone hears it, but no one comments. Hunger's a family affair. Here's a grim little fringe fact. During particularly hard winters, some peasants resorted to boiling tree bark into soup. Not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because it gave their stomachs something to do. There were also bread loaves made from ground acorns, dried peas, or even clay mixed with flour just to stretch it out. You remember someone in your village doing that last year? The bread crumbled like sand and made your mouth feel like it owed you an apology. Scholars still argue about how close to starvation medieval peasants regularly came. Some say famine was seasonal, almost predictable, with lean months in late winter and early spring known as the hungry gap. Others argue that clever storage and communal support made it survivable. Barely. Either way, you're living it now, and there's nothing hypothetical about the emptiness in your belly. You stare at the stew bubbling on the fire, counting the root chunks like they're gold coins. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 if you count the piece that looks like it used to be a carrot. You ladle out the portions with mechanical precision, knowing every mouthful is math. Your father gets more, he chops wood, your sister gets more, she's still sick. You take what's left. It's barely a ladleful, but it's hot, and you sip it slowly, pretending it's richer than it is. Later, you head outside to try your luck with foraging. It's a joke, really. Nothing grows now. The ground's too hard to dig for roots, and the bushes are nothing but skeletons. You spot a few frozen berries still clinging to a branch, shriveled and sad but edible. You scrape lichen off a tree too, because someone once told you could eat that if you boiled it enough. You don't know if it's true, but you're willing to test your luck. You bring it back like treasure. Your mother eyes it, shrugs, and tosses it into the pot. You take a break by the edge of the field, looking out over the land that once grew barley, wheat, and turnips. Now it's a white sheet stretched over a corpse. You remember running through it in summer, chasing bees and kicking at dandelions. You remember the colour green, barely. You kick at the snow with your boot and uncover a few stubborn stubble stalks, dry, dead remnants of last season's harvest. You snap one off and twirl it between your fingers until it breaks, scattering splinters into the wind. Back in the cottage, the stew is boiling again. Thin, sour, but warm. And here's where you start to understand the cruel joke of winter. It doesn't kill you all at once, it starves you slowly. It seeps into your gut, your skin, your mind. It takes your food, then your comfort, then your joy, and it never apologizes. But you're still here. Your family is too. For now. The stew tastes like nothing. But it's hot, and it fills the space where hunger lives. You made it through another day, and with any luck you'll wake to another. The howling starts just after sunset. Not the wind this time. Different. Sharper. More alive. It cuts through the stillness of evening like a knife through cloth. Distant at first, but rising, getting closer with every breath. It's the kind of sound that makes you freeze in place, stew spoon in hand, heart suddenly tight in your chest. You glance at your father. His face has gone flat, eyes fixed on the window like he's trying to see through the frost-thickened cloth. He doesn't say anything. Doesn't have to. You've heard this before. Everyone has. It's the wolves. Most nights they're just a worry. A rumour on the edge of thought. You talk about them when chores are done and the fire's low, when you need something to blame for missing chickens or those goat bones you found too cleanly picked. But tonight they're not a story. They're real, close, and hungry. The animals in the house know before you do. The cow is standing now, ears twitching, wide-eyed and still. The pig, usually too lazy to care about much, is snorting nervously in its corner. Even the dog, half deaf and fully spoiled, is up on his feet, hackles raised, a low growl vibrating through his ribs like a warning bell made of fur. Your little brother opens his mouth to ask a question, but your mother hushes him before the words get out. Everyone goes quiet. Even the stew simmers more carefully. Then you hear it again, closer this time. A long, low howl that seems to pour in through the cracks in the walls curling into the corners of the cottage. Then another, and another. It's not one wolf, it's a pack. Your father stands and grabs the wood axe, not because it'll help, but because it's the only weapon you've got. He moves toward the door, but your mother catches his arm. "Don't," she says quietly. "They're not after us. Not yet, anyway, because here's the truth. Wolves don't usually attack people, not unless they're desperate. And winter makes everyone desperate. In years past, they kept to the forest, hunting deer and boars. But now the deer are long gone, the boars hibernating or dead, and the wolves have come down from the hills, drawn by the scent of livestock, garbage, and fear. There's meat in the village, somewhere. Maybe not much, but enough to catch a hungry nose. And here's a grim, fringy truth that doesn't get passed down in sweet bedtime tales. During particularly brutal winters, wolves have attacked people. Small children taken from yards, shepherds dragged from their posts, whole packs slipping into villages and snatching pigs from pens before anyone could scream. It didn't happen every year, but when it did, no one forgot. You step away from the door, heart hammering. The sound of claws on packed snow echoes faintly outside. You pull your siblings closer, huddling near the fire, though it suddenly feels more decorative than useful. The dog stays by the door, tense, growling softly. The cow lets out a nervous low, and the pig squeals once before falling silent. And then, nothing. The howls stop. No movement. No sound, just silence. You all sit there waiting. Minutes pass, maybe longer. The silence grows heavy, like the wolves are holding their breath too. Finally, your father eases away from the door, muttering, "They're testing us." He tosses another log into the fire, and the sparks leap up like they're trying to escape. They're listening, smelling, deciding. You want to ask, deciding what? But you already know. Your mother pulls the blanket tighter around your sick sister, then stands and hangs a small bundle of herbs above the door. Not for the smell, for the charm. Wolves fear fire, yes, but people fear what drives them. Hunger, spirit things. In old stories, wolves are more than animals. They're messengers, warnings, punishments. They come when something's wrong. You wonder what's wrong now. Some villagers say wolves can smell sickness, that they gather near homes where death is already circling. Your eyes flick to your sister. She's sleeping soundly now, breathing slow and deep, but her skin still looks pale. Too pale. You push the thought away. You spend the night listening. The fire burns high, louder than usual, as if it knows it's your only barrier. No one speaks much. Your brother falls asleep on your shoulder, and your mother dozes off in her chair, head resting against the wall. The dog keeps watch, ears twitching, eyes never leaving the door. At some point in the night you hear a different sound, crunching snow, not footsteps, not hooves, pads and slow, deliberate, passing just beyond the cottage wall. You hold your breath. Your heart thumps so hard it feels like it might give you away, but the sound fades. No scratching, no growling, just fading footfalls. They've moved on. Here's where the historians get divided. Some argue that wolves in medieval Europe were greatly feared, hunted relentlessly and often exaggerated in folk tales. Others believe the fear was not exaggerated, that wolves were a genuine, terrifying threat, especially in isolated villages during harsh winters. Either way, the stories lived on for centuries. You've heard them all your life, and tonight they feel very, very real. By morning, there's no sign of them, just tracks, paw prints in the snow circling the livestock pen outside, disappearing into the woods beyond. The pig looks shaken. The cow won't stop shifting. The dog finally lies down with a heavy, exhausted sigh. You make sure the fire stays strong all day, and when dusk creeps back in, you double the wood on the hearth, light every candle, and hang another charm near the window. You survive the night, but the wolves, they're still out there, and winter isn't done yet. It starts with the stool, not the bad one. You burned that weeks ago. This one's your mother's, the squat little three-legged thing she sits on when peeling vegetables or shelling beans. Or more recently, staring into the fire and whispering about how many turnips are left. That stool. You find your father standing over it with an axe in hand, staring down like it personally offended him. You already know what he's thinking. You knew this moment was coming. The wood is gone. Everything that was meant to be firewood has long since turned to ash. The cart's been stripped down to its last usable plank. The gate's half gone. A corner of the fence now flaps open like a drunken door. Even the beam from the shed roof, that was a dramatic day, got chopped down and dragged inside after that snowstorm collapsed half the wall. And now it's furniture time. You say nothing as he lifts the axe and splits the stool clean in half. One piece for morning, one for night. It's not just about staying warm anymore, it's about staying. The fire is your anchor in this sea of white, and without it the cottage becomes a coffin. You gather the stool pieces in your arms, watching splinters trail behind you on the floor. Your mother looks up but doesn't say a word. Her expression is calm, distant, like she's watching someone else's life unfold. She just shifts her weight onto the floor and keeps peeling. Later, your brother asks if the bed frame is next. You tell him no. You lie. People talk about surviving winter like it's a test of endurance. But here's the ugly truth they don't say out loud. Sometimes survival means choosing what to destroy, what to sacrifice. And the deeper into winter you go, the more personal those choices become. Today, it's the stool. Tomorrow, could be the door, the family chest, that shelf your grandfather built. You start looking at everything in the house, not as furniture, but as calories, burnable units. You weigh each item in your head, how much heat it'll give, how long it'll last. You start mentally categorizing things as worth saving or worth burning. Your little brother's wooden toys, burned last week. The carved spoon set your aunt gave your mother before she died, probably next. It's not personal, it's combustion. You burn sentiment second, you burn nostalgia third, comfort goes before both. And here's a deeply unpleasant fringe fact. This was common, really common. When firewood ran out, peasants turned to whatever could burn. Furniture, tools, walls, even roofs. There are records of families removing entire roof beams just to get through the coldest nights, knowing full well they'd pay for it when spring rains arrived. But they did it anyway. Because the alternative was worse. Your father's eyes have that vacant look now. Not despair, just calculation. You see him scanning the room the way a starving man might scan a table. Not for food, but for pieces he can eat with his eyes. You follow his gaze and realise the shelf over the hearth might only last a few more days before it meets the axe. The fire burns high that evening, thanks to the stool, and everyone sits close, skin glowing with the kind of warmth that feels like a luxury. You almost forget it came at the cost of something that used to hold your dinner. You wrap a blanket around your shoulders and let the heat soak into your bones, pretending you're not counting sticks in your head like a nervous accountant. Your sister's still weak but improving. She sits upright now, pale but alert, cradling a bowl of broth like it's something sacred. When she looks at you and smiles, small, crooked, tired, you feel the smallest flicker of something you almost don't recognise. Relief. She's getting better, which means the fire was worth it. The stool was worth it. Maybe even the bed frame when the time comes. You're not alone in your dread. Every household in the village has its own rules, its own rituals. Some won't leave shoes near the door, afraid they'll draw in wandering spirits. Others won't say certain names after sunset. You know a woman who refuses to speak at all during the first hour after sundown. Claims it keeps the voices away. You've never heard the voices, but you've felt that silence. It's the kind that presses on your ribs, like you're being watched by something that remembers being human. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you check the fire 3 times, you rake the coals, bank them with care, and whisper an old rhyme your grandmother taught you. You're not sure what the words mean, they're in a tongue she barely remembered, but the rhythm is soothing, protective. You pull the covers up and listen to the wind circle the house like it's looking for a way in. The dog growls once, low and half asleep. You freeze, then silence. You shut your eyes and press your hand to the charm by your bed. Maybe the wind's just being dramatic. Or maybe she's out there, the hag with frostbitten fingers, waiting to slip inside the walls of a cottage where the fire's gone cold. Not tonight. By morning the wind has quieted, but not out of mercy. No, it's the kind of quiet that feels like winter is just waiting, watching. You wake with your face pressed against a sibling's shoulder and your knees drawn up so tight to your chest you could pass for a particularly miserable hedgehog. The fire is down to ash and red glowing crumbs, barely warm enough to boil a bad idea. You sit up slowly, squinting against the dim light, and stretch until your joints protest like rusty hinges. Time to move. Again. Breakfast is predictable. Stew, or at least the thinned out broth of what used to be stew. You sip it slowly, savouring the heat more than the taste, and then it's back into your layers. Tunic, overdress, wool socks, if you're lucky, rags if you're not, cloak, scarf and gloves that are really just pieces of old fabric with holes cut for your thumbs. Your boots go on last and they're still damp from yesterday. Of course they are. Today you've been assigned one of the more critical yet strangely pleasant tasks of winter survival. A visit to the alewife. Not for gossip, not for joy, for the drink. Because if there's the one thing that cuts through the cold and keeps your insides from staging a mutiny, it's a cup of something warm and vaguely alcoholic. Ale is everywhere. It's safer than water, cheaper than wine, and just strong enough to take the edge off. You don't drink to get drunk. Not usually. Not in the daytime anyway. You drink because it helps you stay warm. Or at least it tricks your brain into thinking you're warm, which honestly feels the same if you don't think too hard. The alewife lives 3 cottages down in a squat stone building, with a wide chimney and an ever-present haze of steam curling from under the eaves. Her name's Marla, and she has the look of someone who's stared winter in the face and dared it to blink. Her hands are permanently red from years of stirring barrels, and her breath always smells faintly of yeast and onions. You love her. Everyone does. She greets you with a grunt and a nod, already pulling a ladle from a steaming pot. The room smells amazing. Malty, nutty, with just a hint of something sharp that might be old apple or disappointment. She pours you a small wooden cup of warm ale and slides it across the counter. You wrap your hands around it like it's a newborn. You sip. It burns. Perfect. Ale isn't brewed strong, it's more like thick bread juice with ideas above its station. But it works. It warms your chest, settles your stomach, and gives you the faintest blush of optimism. Some days it's the only reason your fingers don't fall off. You take a few more sips, savouring the way the warmth spreads out in your belly like a soft, slow sunrise. Marla eyes you with the kind of expression only middle-aged women in charge of booze can pull off, equal parts stern and vaguely amused. "You look half frozen," she mutters, ladling another cup for the next poor soul who stumbles in. You nod, raise your cup in salute, and finish it in 2 gulps. Here's a weird fact: in medieval times, everyone drank ale. Children, adults, monks, nuns. There was small ale, which was very weak, barely alcoholic, and strong ale, which was reserved for more festive or desperate situations. In winter, the alewife was as essential as the blacksmith or the baker. She kept the village from freezing, starving, and going completely mad. Some alewives, like Marla, made theirs with malted barley and hops, but in poor areas they got creative. Herbs, dried fruit, even grain scrapings from the mill. There was a kind of quiet genius in the way they stretched ingredients. And yes, sometimes it tasted like someone's feet steeped in pond water, but you still drank it, because the alternative was cold, and cold was worse than almost anything. You step back out into the wind, cheeks flushed from both the ale and the heat inside Marla's shop. The cold slaps you immediately, like it's offended by your moment of comfort. But your core is warm now, and that makes all the difference. You head home slowly, stopping once to stomp the snow off your boots and adjust the rag around your neck. The sky's still grey, the trees are brittle and bare, but for a minute you feel like you can handle it. Back at the cottage, your family's gathered near the hearth, mumbling through the morning tasks. Someone's chopping root vegetables, someone else is patching a hole in a sock with a needle that bends more than it stitches. The dog is licking the inside of a bowl like it's being paid to. You add a few sticks to the fire and sit, letting the embers paint your skin with warmth. And here's something historians still argue about. Just how drunk were peasants, really? Some say it was constant, day-long buzzes to fend off cold and boredom. Others argue that most ale was so weak it barely counted, more like tea with dreams of rebellion. Still, we know that ale was a staple. It provided calories, hydration, and just enough emotional buffer to survive the average medieval Tuesday. You sip from your refilled cup, now lukewarm but still comforting. The warmth has reached your fingertips again. Your toes, wrapped in rags and prayers, are less angry than usual. You stretch your legs toward the fire and sigh. Outside, the wind growls again, dragging its claws across the shutters. You ignore it. You've got layers, you've got stew, and you've got ale. For now, that's enough. The night is coming, but you're ready, or at least you're slightly tipsy. The fire crackles a little louder tonight, a rare sign of overachievement in this tiny war you're always waging against cold. Someone must have scored a few pieces of decent wood, probably your father, who came back earlier muttering something about almost losing a toe, and never trusting frozen fences again. Still, you're grateful. That extra heat will matter, because your sister's been coughing for 2 days now, and it's starting to sound bad. She's curled up on the straw pallet near the hearth, wrapped in every blanket the family could spare, her face pale and flushed all at once, somehow both frozen and burning. You sit nearby, keeping an eye on her, holding a cup of warm broth you'll probably end up giving to her anyway. No one says it, but you're all thinking the same thing: please not this winter. Because if you get sick in the middle of the cold season, your odds start looking bleak. There's no doctor in the village, just an old woman named Hilda who claims to know things, about herbs, about healing, about what the spirits say. Your mother sent for her this morning. She came hobbling in around midday, dragging a bundle of roots and leaves that smelled like damp soil and mistrust. Hilda knelt beside your sister, muttered some things under her breath, then brewed a foul-smelling concoction in a cracked ceramic cup. It looked like mud, smelled like boiled socks, and tasted, according to your brave little brother, like if sadness had a flavour. But your sister drank it anyway, blinking back tears. Hilda nodded once as if that settled it, and then told your parents to keep the fire high, the blankets thick, and the fear low. "She'll come through," she said, "or she won't." "Thanks, Hilda." You lean closer to the hearth, feeling the heat pulse against your skin. Your sister stirs and lets out a ragged cough that sounds like it came from the bottom of a well. You glance toward the others. Your mother pretends not to hear, focused on stirring the stew. Your father sharpens a knife that doesn't need sharpening. Everyone's pretending everything's fine. It's not. This is the part of winter that wears you down. Not just the cold in your fingers or the ice in your boots, but the helplessness. You can't fight wind. You can't bribe frost. And when someone gets sick, there's no hospital, no medicine, no warm waiting room with magazines and a grumpy clerk. There's only what you have on hand, and what you believe. Hilda left behind a pouch of dried elderflower and yarrow root. Your mother's already made tea with them twice. The tea helps a little, maybe. Or maybe it's just warm water and hope. Either way, you make another batch and offer it to your sister, who sips it with shaking hands and whispers, "It tastes like broomsticks." You smile and smooth her hair, pretending you don't notice how hot her forehead is. Here's a strange fringe remedy you remember Hilda mentioning. Stuffing warm onions in someone's socks. Sounds ridiculous, smells worse, but apparently it draws out the fever. She also swears by garlic poultices for chest infections, mashed into a paste smeared on a cloth and strapped directly to the skin. You've done it once before. It made your cousin smell like a roast, but he survived. And what do the scholars say? They argue, of course. Some believe that peasant medicine, rooted in herbalism and oral tradition, was far more effective than it gets credit for, especially compared to the official medical treatments of the time, which involved things like bloodletting, leeches, or wrapping a toad in linen and wearing it round your neck. Others think most cures were guesswork at best and dangerous nonsense at worst. But here's the thing. In winter, you don't have time for debate. You go with what might help. You go with anything. The cottage smells now like wood smoke. Onions, damp wool, and something bitter and sharp from the herbs boiling near the fire. Your sister's breath is raspy but steady. That's a win. The dog sleeps at her feet, and even he seems quieter than usual, like he knows this is not the time for licking the floor or barking at shadows. You sit through the afternoon, feeding the fire with whatever's left in the woodpile and watching the light change outside. Snow falls again, slow and steady, blanketing the village in silence. Every now and then, a distant rooster crows, confused, probably. Roosters have no idea what's going on in winter. None of us do. Your brother plays quietly with a piece of carved wood, dragging it through the ashes like it's a boat in grey water. Your parents speak in low voices, arguing about whether to send someone for more herbs or wait and see. You just keep watching your sister's chest rise and fall, slow and steady, and try not to count the gaps between breaths. Another strange old remedy you remember? Sleeping with a warm brick wrapped in cloth under your blanket. It was supposed to keep your blood from going thick with the cold. You wonder if you could heat one on the hearth now. You'd have to dig it out of the floor, but it might help. You make a mental note. The stew is bubbling again, thinner than yesterday, but hot. Your mother ladles some into the bowls and passes them around. You take yours and sip it, trying not to think about how many more meals the pot can provide before it's just flavoured water. Tomorrow someone will need to beg, trade or steal more vegetables. Maybe you. You're fast at least, and desperate. By the time night falls, your sister's fever hasn't worsened. She's still pale, still quiet, but the worst of the coughs have slowed. You take that as a victory. You bank the fire with care, cover her with a second sheepskin, and whisper a little rhyme you only half believe. Then you crawl into bed, limbs aching, heart heavier than usual. Winter isn't just about snow and wind. It's about holding your breath night after night, waiting to see who makes it to morning. Night again, and the cold creeps in like a gossip, slipping through every crack and corner of the cottage, whispering unkind things to your bones. You wake with a full bladder, of course, and the grim knowledge that your body has betrayed you at the worst possible time. It's pitch dark, and the fire's gone to glowing embers. You try to ignore the urge, willing your bladder to hold out just until morning, but it won't. It never does. So you sigh, curse softly, and prepare yourself for what might be the worst part of any medieval peasant's winter routine: going to the toilet. Now, toilet is being extremely generous. There is no indoor privy, no chamber pot, unless you count the cracked clay bowl your mother uses for stew on special feast days. And even that's currently full of soup, so let's not be monsters. If you're lucky and it's not too freezing, you can sneak out and relieve yourself in the designated spot behind the shed, where snow piles high and dignity goes to die. You grope around in the dark for your boots and cloak, pull them on over your nightshirt, and wince as your feet hit the icy ground. The dog lifts his head as you move past him, blinks once, then flops back down. Clearly he has no intention of joining you. You envy him deeply. Oh. You unlatch the door with numb fingers and step outside into the frigid darkness. The snow reflects the moonlight like powdered glass, and for a second, it's weirdly beautiful. Quiet, glowing, still. Then the wind hits your face like an angry slap, and you remember exactly where you are and what you're doing. The path to the latrine area is uneven and half buried. Your boots crunch loudly with each step, and you try not to look around too much. There's something about being alone at night in winter that makes every shadow feel suspicious. You hear the creak of tree branches, the distant yowl of some animal that sounds far too big to be a cat, and a low whistle of wind that curls into your ear like a warning. You reach the toilet spot, which is really just a shallow pit dug back in late autumn, now half frozen and rimmed with frost like a terrible cupcake. There's a wooden post you can hold onto for balance if you trust it, which you don't, because the last time your uncle leaned on it, it snapped and dumped him into a situation no one speaks of anymore. You handle your business as quickly as humanly possible, because the cold has now reached a level where it feels like your internal organs are retracting. Every second is agony, and you swear if one more gust of wind hits your bare thighs, you're just going to give up and let nature claim you. Job done, you bolt back toward the house, heart pounding from the cold and from that unshakable sense that something might be watching. Is it? Probably not, but maybe. Who knows? It's winter. Reality is a loose concept. Inside, the warmth, such as it is, greets you like a friend with bad breath. You shut the door, latch it with shaky hands, and stamp the snow off your boots. The dog sighs again, annoyed by the noise. You toss your cloak off and crawl back into the bed, curling up in the exact shape of a regret. It takes a while to fall asleep after that. Your skin is cold, your feet ache, and your bladder still feels a bit insulted. You try to focus on the sounds of the room, the slow breathing of your siblings, the occasional pop from the hearth, the soft shifting of the cow in the corner pen. It helps. Eventually you drift off. And here's where it gets weird. Some wealthier homes did have chamber pots or guard robes, those medieval toilets built into the wall that emptied outside. Fancy, sure, but most peasants, they just went outside, day or night, summer or winter. That pit behind the house, that was it. No seats, no shelter, no consideration for frostbite. You just learned to move fast, develop excellent night vision, and hope you didn't step in anything regrettable. Here's a fun fringe fact you didn't need, but can't stop thinking about. In some especially cold regions, people would use stones. Yes, stones. Heated by the fire and wrapped in cloth. Not just for warming their beds, but for peeing on. A literal hot stone toilet. Say what you want, but that's innovation born of suffering. Scholars still argue about how often peasants actually relieve themselves indoors. There's some evidence that people use chamber pots in very cold winters, especially the elderly or the sick. Others say most peasants didn't have anything even close to that luxury and just made do with the outdoors, no matter the season. What they all agree on is this: hygiene in medieval winter? Not great. And speaking of hygiene, you're probably wondering, did people ever clean themselves after a midnight dash to the frost pit? Look, they tried. Snow, leaves, straw, moss. You work with what you've got. Sometimes it's clean enough. Sometimes it's just better than nothing. And honestly, that sums up most things in winter. The next morning you wake to the smell of wood smoke and boiled onion. Your sister is still breathing steadily, which sends a quiet wave of relief through the cottage. Your brother is already at the hearth stirring the stew, and your mother's hands are red from scrubbing yesterday's rags in near-frozen water. You sit up slowly, trying to shake the cold from your joints. Your cloak is still damp from the nighttime expedition, and your boots are stiff. You mutter something about needing a better system. Your father nods absently and says, "We'll dig a second pit come spring." You both know that's a lie. Spring is a fantasy right now. The only reality is more stew, more snow, and more midnight walks of shame to the toilet trench. Still, you made it through the night. Again, it's a small win. But in winter, small wins are everything. Morning breaks in the most reluctant way possible. More of a slow bruising of the sky than a sunrise. You blink awake, your eyelashes crusted with frost and your lips cracked. The inside of your nose so dry it hurts just to breathe. For a second, you're not entirely sure if you're alive. The chill has settled in deep, curling around your spine like a persistent question. Are you still here? You sit up slowly, stiff and groggy, and listen for the familiar signs of morning. The fire is out. Of course it is. Your father's already up, crouched near the hearth, poking at the ashes with a stick like he's trying to wake a very stubborn ghost. You can tell from the tilt of his head that it's not going well. Dead, he mutters, eyes still fixed on the cold grey remnants. You've seen this look before. It's not panic exactly, just deep, tired irritation at the universe. The thing about fires in winter is that they're more than warmth. They're hope, light, the illusion of control. When you wake up and find the fire has gone out completely, it's like the world has taken a tiny victory against you. You can relight it, sure, but the house won't be warm again for hours. The cold has crept into everything, your clothes, your shoes, even the soup pot, which now has a thin crust of ice across the top. You rub your arms and stagger toward the hearth to help. Your fingers are clumsy, fumbling with the kindling as your breath fogs the air in quick little clouds. Your father adds dried moss, straw. Here's a debate among historians. Were peasants actually this desperate in winter, or are we romanticising their suffering? Some argue that with proper planning, harvesting peat, collecting deadfall, bartering for coal, many families got by. Others point to chronic shortages, brutal weather patterns, and real famine records that suggest people burned whatever they could just to see the next day. The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the mess. Maybe some families were prepared, but others? They made it through by torching everything that wasn't nailed down, and eventually some things that were. You reach for the ladle and stir the stew. It's more water than food now, but at least it's hot. The dog watches with one eye open, clearly calculating whether the wooden spoon you're holding might be his new chew toy. You give him a scratch behind the ears and toss him a bit of bread crust. He eats it like it's a banquet. That night, your father pulls down the old spinning wheel from the attic. It hasn't worked in years. Your mother used to say she'd fix it when spring came. No one mentions that now. You watch as he lays it across the chopping block, lines up the axe, and splits it clean. The fire crackles like it's laughing. You lie down with your cloak wrapped tight, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of wood burning that once belonged to your grandmother. The room glows orange, warm and familiar. The smell of smoke is thick but comforting. It smells like survival. It smells like home. You close your eyes. The bed frame creaks beneath you. You try not to wonder what it'll sound like when it breaks apart beneath the axe. There's a point in winter when the cold stops feeling like weather and starts feeling like a personality. It creeps into your home like a grumpy relative who overstays their welcome, sullen and always slightly damp. It stops surprising you. You stop flinching when you step into your boots and your toes go numb in seconds. You stop reacting when your breath fogs in the air like you're talking to ghosts. And that's the danger. The cold wants you to get used to it. Which is probably why people start turning to the less visible forms of warmth. Faith, superstition, magic. The lines between them get blurry when your fingers are purple and the stew tastes like sadness. Tonight, the wind's picking up again. Not quite howling, but definitely muttering. You glance up from the hearth to see your mother standing near the door, her hands moving in slow, deliberate patterns. She's tracing a sun symbol with chalk on the beam above the lintel, murmuring words under her breath. You've seen her do this before, but only in the darkest part of winter. It's a quiet thing, almost secret, and she never explains it. But you know the symbol. A wheel, simple and old with 4 spokes. A solar sign meant to call back the sun, or at least convince it to stop sulking behind the clouds and come do its job. Your father doesn't stop her. He doesn't participate either. He just pokes the fire and mutters about dry moss. You know he believes, though, in his own way. They all do. Every home in the village has its rituals. Yours just happen to involve herbs above the door, and patterns scratched into the wood when the cold gets too bold. Tonight, your mother adds a sprig of dried rosemary to the beam and lights a stub of candle, not from the hearth, but from a flint spark. New flame, she says softly. Old light. You sit quietly and watch the wax melt down the side, pooling on the shelf where the last of the dried apples used to sit. It smells like beeswax and smoke and hope. Religious observances blur into folk magic this time of year. The parish priest gives sermons about trusting in God's plan, but even he hangs a braid of garlic over the door in winter and keeps a candle lit during snowstorms, just in case. Your neighbour swears by St. Bridget's crosses, woven from rushes and hung over the fireplace. Another family paints white chalk stars on the floor near the bed. And Hilda, the village healer, has about 7 talismans around her neck, and at least 3 hidden under her cloak. You counted once. One fringe tradition you've always found strange but oddly comforting: candle magic. Not magic in the spellbook sense, but symbolic. Lighting a candle and speaking a wish aloud as the flame flares. It's not about believing the candle can change your fate. It's about reminding yourself you have a fate to believe in. You tried it once, last winter, when your goat went missing. You wished for its return. The goat came back the next morning, smelling like it had spent the night drinking with witches. Coincidence? Maybe, but the candle stub still sits in the corner. You reach into the small pouch tied to the beam, the one with dried sage, thyme, and a pinch of salt. Your mother calls it the sleep blend. You scatter a bit into the fire now, and the smoke curls up with a different scent. Sharper. Cleaner. The room feels less heavy. Maybe it's just psychological. Maybe that's the point. And here's where scholars get into arguments again. Some believe that medieval peasants had a rich, structured belief system, full of practical rituals passed down through generations. Others think most of it was scattershot, local traditions, misunderstood saints, half-pagan customs tacked onto Christian calendars. The truth probably lies somewhere in the hearth smoke, a blend of desperation, memory, and whatever you could get your hands on. Tonight, you and your siblings help your mother create a little altar near the hearth. Not an elaborate one, just a few simple things: the candle, a coin, a bit of bread, and a twig with the green moss still clinging to it. Symbols of warmth, wealth, food, and spring. You don't expect miracles, but it helps. It feels like doing something. The candle flickers wildly as the wind howls again, louder now. Your brother clutches the dog, who looks deeply unimpressed by this turn of events. You stare into the flame and speak your own wish softly, careful not to let anyone hear. Not because it's secret, but because you're afraid saying it aloud might jinx it. You wish for one morning where you can see the sun. That's it. Just light. Real light. You glance at the window where frost curls across the cloth like fingers. The snow outside has drifted halfway up the wall now. You're not even sure where the front path ends anymore. But inside, the fire is steady. The charm above the door glows faintly with waxy light, and the room smells like sage and bread crusts. Your father finally joins you by the hearth, sitting down with a grunt and rubbing his hands together. He doesn't say anything, but you notice he slips the rosemary from the beam into his coat pocket. Just for luck, probably, or just for warmth. Later, as you curl into the bed box with your siblings, you see the candle stub still flickering on the hearth. It's almost out, but not quite. Your mother lets it burn down naturally, never snuffing it. "Let the wish go out on its own," she once said. "It'll find its way." You fall asleep to the smell of herbs and wax and wood smoke. You dream of fire that never dies, of sunlight that melts the snow, and of saints and spirits passing through your cottage, nodding quietly at the symbols above your door before stepping back into the dark. You wake in the night once and swear you see the candle flame move, just slightly, like it's dancing for someone else. And you don't feel quite as cold. You've never quite trusted the dark hours between midnight and dawn. They're slippery, more dream than time. The fire drops low, the wind shifts direction, and the walls of the cottage feel less like a home and more like a hollow shell suspended in frost. You lie awake in the bed box, pressed between your brother's knees and your sister's cough, and listen to the soft crackle of the hearth. You're not sure if you're asleep or just very still. Then your eyes open and everything feels wrong. Not in a scary way, not like the wolves are back, just wrong in the way that a room feels after someone has stepped in and left without touching anything. You glance at the window, still dark but not black, the kind of soft grey that means it's almost morning. You stare at the ceiling and realise once again that you've woken in the middle of the night. Again. And you're not alone. Your father is already up, stirring the fire. Your mother's sitting beside him, her head wrapped in a shawl, hands cradling a warm cup. They're not talking, just sitting, awake, like it's the most normal thing in the world. And weirdly it is. Because in this house, and in others like it, you don't always sleep straight through. In fact, you rarely do. Winter has its own rhythm, one you've fallen into without ever realising it. A pattern of first sleep and second sleep. You crawl out of the bed box and tiptoe to the hearth, wrapping a blanket around your shoulders. The heat feels different in these hours, more intimate, less a shield against the cold and more of a companion. Your father nods at you, not surprised you're awake. He hands you a half mug of warm ale. "Good timing," he murmurs. He says it like this is a normal time to be up, because it is. first sleep begins not long after sundown, especially in winter when darkness shows up before supper's finished. Everyone collapses into bed early, worn out by chores, cold and thin stew. But somewhere in the middle of the night the house stirs, eyes open, limbs stretch, people rise. Not to start the day, just to exist, to sit, to think, to be. This watching hour, as some folks call it, is when your mother mends clothes. Your father checks the animals, sometimes they talk quietly, sometimes they don't. You've heard them laugh in this hour, share stories they don't tell in daylight. The kind you only tell when the wind is rattling the roof and the rest of the world is asleep. Tonight, you just sit with them. You don't say anything. You sip your drink and let the warmth settle into your bones. The firelight dances on the walls, and the dog stretches out at your feet, groaning like the floor offended him personally. This split sleep thing isn't just your family being strange. It's a real rhythm, natural in fact. Some historians say medieval folks commonly broke their sleep into two parts. First sleep, which started shortly after nightfall, and second sleep, which picked up again in the early morning hours. In between, there was this liminal space, a twilight, a wakefulness. People used it to pray, read, stoke fires, or talk. Some even visited neighbours, if the moonlight was good and the snow wasn't too deep. Imagine that, trudging through a frozen village at 2 a.m. just to borrow a needle, or hear the latest gossip. Others used the time for, let's call it, marital intimacy. Your parents don't talk about that part. Thank the saints. You stretch your legs toward the fire and glance at your sister, still asleep in the bedbox. Her fever hasn't come back. Her skin looks less ghost-like. That at least feels like a win. Your mother hums softly to herself as she threads a needle and begins stitching a torn sleeve. Her fingers move with the kind of grace that comes from repetition, not joy. You watch her for a while, hypnotised by the rhythm, the fire, the strange silence of the house, and then, just as naturally as it began, the second wave of sleep returns. You feel it roll in like a soft fog, pulling at your eyelids, curling around your spine. You finish the ale, now lukewarm, and set the mug down. Your father tosses another stick into the fire and nods toward the bed. No words, just a shared understanding. The hour has passed. The night is closing its second hand. You climb back into the bedbox, rearranging yourself in the limited real estate between your siblings. The straw crinkles beneath you, and the wool itches your neck, but you're already fading. The warmth from the hearth still lingers, caught in your cloak and fingers. You close your eyes and don't open them again until the sky is lighter, and the rooster, confused as ever, begins its off-key crowing from somewhere near the frozen coop. When you rise again, it's with a strange sense of balance, like you've lived 2 nights in one, and maybe, in a way, you have. Here's the fringe bit that never gets taught in history lessons. Some monks and scholars used the watching hour to write. The hours between sleeps were said to be clear, unpeaceful, even blessed. Your thoughts weren't cluttered yet. Your body wasn't burdened. Ideas came easier. Some believed it was a sacred time, a whisper between the chaos of days, a pause in the noise. You don't know about sacred, but you do know that this morning feels quieter, softer. The fire is already lit. The house smells like something almost edible. Your sister smiles when you hand her cup. Your mother's shawl is still draped on her shoulders. You nod at your father and he nods back. There's still cold, still snow, still hunger. But there was also a moment, somewhere between sleeps, where the world didn't feel like it was trying to kill you. And sometimes that's enough to get through the next day. The stew is bubbling again, and you're starting to hate it. You try not to. It's done so much for you, warmed your stomach, kept your insides moving, given your fingers something to hold. But now, just the smell of it, onion, root veg, maybe a hint of last week's pigeon bone, makes your stomach curl in protest. You stare into your bowl and imagine a different life. One with meat that isn't grey, with bread that doesn't need to be soaked in broth just to chew, with flavour. You glance at your brother, who's poking at his spoon like he's performing surgery on something unpleasant. "How's yours?" you ask. He shrugs. "Hot," he says. "It's the best anyone can say." Later, you lean over the hearth, sloshing a bit of stew into the coals by accident. It hisses and steams. The scent that comes off it isn't terrible, but it's familiar in the worst way. It clings to your skin, your cloak, even your dreams. There's no escape, and in that moment, as the firelight flickers off the iron pot and the room fills with another blast of wood smoke and boiled root, you think, I miss having taste buds, but the stew is just the beginning. The real betrayal comes later, when you try to chew a crust of old bread and feel a sharp jolt in your jaw. You pause, chew again, There it is, a sudden blinding throb from the back of your mouth. You prod it with your tongue, gently at first, then with mounting horror. Yep, that molar is angry. And now you have something new to add to the growing list of medieval winter miseries. Toothache. You don't scream, but you do make a noise that sounds a lot like someone quietly being punched in the face. Your mother looks up, instantly alert. "Tooth?" she asks. You nod grimly, still prodding the offending spot. She sighs, sets down her needlework, and starts rummaging through her basket of herbal wonders/disappointments. Let's talk about medieval dental care. Ready? There isn't any. Not unless you count rinsing your mouth with vinegar, chewing mint, or stuffing a wad of moss into your cheek and hoping for a miracle. Teeth are a luxury here. If you're old and still have most of them, you're a walking miracle. If you're young and already missing a few, well, join the club. The culprit in your case is probably rot, brought on by too many stale grains and not enough anything else. Maybe a cracked tooth from biting into an unsoaked crust, maybe just bad luck. Whatever the cause, it's here now, pulsing in time with your heartbeat. Your mother hands you a thick paste she's mashed from cloves and wine. "Hold it there," she says, pressing the bundle into your palm. "Don't swallow it. It's not for eating." As if you were remotely tempted. You apply the mash and wait. The clove numbs your tongue first, then the edge of your throat, then finally, blessedly, the tooth. It's not gone, but it's dulled. Like the pain has been swaddled and told to hush, you lean back against the wall and let your jaw hang open slightly, hoping air will help. Here's a delightful fringe detail. Some people in your village believe that a toothache is caused by tiny invisible worms that crawl inside and gnaw from within. You know it's ridiculous. Probably. But when your jaw's throbbing and your whole skull feels like it's trying to boil from the inside out, the idea of tiny spite worms starts to sound oddly plausible. And here's where the scholars come in, bless them. They argue endlessly over whether medieval people truly believed in toothworms. Some evidence suggests they did. There are illustrations, poems, even tools supposedly used to draw the worms out. Others argue that the worm theory was symbolic, not literal, a metaphor for the decay and pain that came from within. Either way, no one had a solution. If your tooth got bad enough, the options were limited. Option 1, suffer. Option 2, Hilda. Yes, Hilda again. She's not a dentist, no one is. But she has a set of pliers and the kind of grim smile that makes you instantly regret walking through her door. People say she can pull a pain right out of your skull, which sounds comforting until you realise it means exactly what it sounds like. One yank, one scream, one fewer tooth in your face. You're not there yet, not tonight. For now, the clove paste is holding, barely. As the day drags on, you keep to softer foods. Thick broth, bits of porridge, a very sad boiled turnip. You avoid chewing on the bad side, which turns mealtime into a frustrating, one-sided battle. The dog watches you the whole time with that judgmental expression he reserves for weakness. You glare at him and he yawns. The cold doesn't help, of course. Cold air seeps in through the cracks, wraps around your face like a damp rag, and makes the ache return with every sharp breath. You tie a wool scarf around your mouth, which helps slightly, though it also makes you look like a very sick bandit. You try not to whine. Your sister's still recovering from her fever, and your brother sliced his hand open on a frozen hinge yesterday. Everyone's hurting. You don't get special treatment just because one of your teeth is throwing a tantrum. That night your mother makes another poultice, this one with sage, a dash of salt, and a bit of something that smells suspiciously like wood varnish. You're too tired to argue. You hold it against your cheek and listen to the wind outside. Another long, cold night. Another round of not sleeping right. But at least you're warm, sort of. And the pain is less now, or maybe your brain's just giving up. You dream of biting into a loaf of warm bread, fresh and soft, full of butter and joy. You wake up chewing on your blanket. The fire's still lit, the stew's still boiling, the tooth still aches. But you're alive. For now, you wake to stillness. Not quiet. The wind's still groaning like it's got a grudge, but a stillness inside the house. The kind that presses against your ears and makes you listen harder. No coughing, no shifting, no muttering from your father. The fire is out again, and the room is lit only by the bruised grey light leaking through the frozen window covering. You sit up slowly, heart already speeding, as though your body knows something before your brain does. Your sister isn't in the bed box. The blanket she slept under is crumpled, still warm to the touch. You scramble up and glance toward the hearth, where the last coals are nothing but ash. You see your mother kneeling near the fire, arms around your sister's small frame, rocking gently. For a second you stop breathing. Then she moves, just her hand, a twitch, small but enough. She's alive, barely. Your mother looks up, eyes rimmed red, and says one word. Fever. It's back. The relief that had settled into your bones over the last few days vanishes like steaming off a snowbank. That sense that maybe the worst had passed, that maybe your sister would recover, and the stew would last and spring would arrive before you had to burn the bedposts. Gone. She's burning up. Her skin is red, blotchy and too dry. She mutters things under her breath. Names, places, nothing that makes sense. Your father sends your brother sprinting across the village for Hilda, his boots kicking up snow like smoke. You don't know if she'll come. You don't know if it'll matter. You find yourself whispering prayers you don't remember learning, your breath freezing in the air as the words leave your lips. And the cold doesn't care. Outside, the snow is thicker than ever. You can barely see the edge of the trees from the window. The sky is a dirty grey quilt, too heavy and close, pressing down on the world like a bad thought. You stand by the door, staring at the drift piled halfway up the threshold, and wonder how many more days this will go on. Because sometimes, winter just doesn't stop. There are stories, you've heard them, of winters that stretch deep into spring. Crops frozen in the ground, animals starving in their pens. Entire villages going silent, one house at a time. You remember one story from the last market day before the snow came. An old man from 3 villages away, wrapped in furs and regret, telling anyone who'd listen about the year without a summer. Said he lived through it as a boy. Said the sun vanished behind clouds that never moved and nothing grew. People chewed bark and boiled leather. He swore the birds didn't even sing. Some say it was just a bad year. Others say it was the punishment, divine or otherwise. Still others whisper about volcanoes far away that spewed so much ash into the air it had turned the sky against the earth. You don't know what to believe, but you know this, you've never seen a winter like this one. Your sister moans softly, and your mother dabs her face with a cloth dipped in snowmelt. No one has the strength to boil water just now, so you use what's on hand. The cloth freezes between soaks. You take turns warming it near the fire. Your father builds it up again using the last of the pantry shelf. The pot clatters as it crashes into the flames. It splinters like kindling. You don't say anything. Your brother returns an hour later, face white from the wind, eyes streaming. She's coming, he gasps. But she's slow, snow's too deep. You nod and thank him, but you already know Hilda might not make it in time. As you wait, you prepare everything you've ever seen your mother do during a fever. You mix up the clove paste. You rub her chest with a pungent blend of garlic and goose fat. You tie strips of cool cloth around her wrists and ankles. Someone mutters a prayer every 10 minutes just to feel like they're doing something. And here's the strange part. In the worst moment, the house gets warmer. Not from the fire, from the movement, from the breath and effort and sheer refusal to let go. You're all too tired to panic, too cold to scream, too stubborn to stop trying. It's what winter demands, not courage, not heroics, just endurance. Fun fringe fact, in some regions, when a fever ran too hot, people believed you could draw it out with fire. They'd heat a rock in the hearth, wrap it in linen, and place it near the feet, hoping the warmth would pull the sickness down and out. You do it now, not because you think it'll work, but because doing something is better than sitting still. And the scholars? Oh, they argue plenty about the science, or lack of it, behind medieval fever treatments. Some say herbalism saved lives. Others dismiss it all as superstition and placebo, but ask anyone who's watched a child shiver through a night while snow piled high against the door and they'll tell you, belief is a tool. Like firewood, like broth, like hope. You use what you have. Night falls again. Hilda arrives just before dark, panting and wild-eyed, covered in snow from head to heel. She doesn't speak, just drops her satchel and gets to work. More garlic, more salves, a foul-smelling syrup your sister barely manages to swallow. She mutters something in a language you don't understand and lights a second candle, placing it in the window facing east. Your mother closes her eyes and does the same. It's past midnight when the fever breaks. Your sister's breathing evens out. Her hands go from red to pink to cool. The muttering stops. The sweat starts, real sweat, not the cold kind. And you all exhale at the same time, like you've just been let up from underwater. You don't celebrate, not yet, but you sleep a little deeper that night. because winter nearly claimed someone, but this time you held on tighter. The morning after the fever breaks feels almost sacred. No choir of angels or golden sunrise, just a quiet, honest sort of peace, like the house itself has taken a breath it had been holding all winter. You open your eyes to find the fire still crackling, the air a bit warmer, the silence less tense. Your mother's asleep in the chair by the hearth, her head tilted back, mouth open, snoring just a little. You don't even have the heart to tease her. She earned it.
Your sister, curled up in a nest of blankets, is finally resting like a person instead of a haunted doll. Her skin is damp, but no longer flushed, and she no longer shivers or mutters. You kneel beside her for a long minute, watching her chest rise and fall. It's the most beautiful thing you've seen in weeks. And then, for the first time in what feels like months, someone says it. Let's eat. Not stew, not broth, not chewable regret floating in hot water. Real food. Okay, not real in the court banquet sense. No roast pig or pies here. But something different, something that smells like intention. Your father has gathered the last of the flour and mixed it with melted snow, a pinch of salt, and the smallest drizzle of the honey hoarded since late summer. It's barely enough to cover your palm, but it's going in the pan. Feast day, he says with a crooked grin, eyes full of exhaustion and something dangerously close to joy. It's not an official feast day on the church calendar. There are no saints involved. It's just that after weeks of scraping by, someone felt strong enough to try, to celebrate, to remind everyone that being alive is still a thing worth honoring. He drops a lump of dough onto the hot iron pan, and it hisses immediately, the sound like applause in miniature. You all lean forward as it cooks, heads tilted like curious birds. Even the dog's ears perk up, and he sits taller, tail thumping the dirt floor like a metronome of hope. The smell spreads fast, sweet, warm, slightly burnt on the edges, and it fills the cottage with something close to comfort. Your brother actually laughs when the first flat cake hits the plate. Your sister, bleary-eyed, manages a whisper. Is that for me? And of course it is. She gets the first bite, which she chews slowly, reverently, like a priest taking communion. You think she might cry. You kind of want to cry too. Then it's your turn. You get a piece no larger than your hand, but when you bite into it, it's heaven. Warm and soft in the middle, crisp at the edges, with just a hint of sweetness that makes you think, dangerously, about fruit. Your mouth remembers flavor, and it's almost too much. This is more than food. It's proof that there's still something left, that you haven't burned it all, eaten it all, lost it all. Feasting in winter is rare, but not impossible. Even peasants made time for it, especially when spirits were low. You didn't need a whole pig or barrels of ale to call it a feast. Sometimes, all it took was doing something on purpose, making something special from the scraps. A flat cake, a hot drink, a little music, if someone still had fingers nimble enough to play. And that's exactly what happens. Your mother, newly awake and blinking like a cave dweller dragged into daylight, pulls out the old bone flute your sister carved last year. It's a crude thing, made from a goose wing and a lot of overconfidence, but it makes sound. Kind of. She plays a few notes, wavery, off-key, but familiar, and suddenly the room has rhythm. Your brother starts tapping on the overturned cooking pot. Your father claps along, and the dog barks in confusion. You sit back, full of cake and surrounded by music that wouldn't pass muster anywhere else. And for a few minutes, you feel full. Really full. Not just in your belly, in your chest. Outside, the snow still falls, the wind still tugs at the eaves, but inside, something has shifted. You've reclaimed a little joy. You've taken back space from winter. Here's a strange fringe fact. In some villages, it was considered bad luck not to feast after surviving a sickness. They believed you had to mark the escape, to thank whatever spirits or saints or sheer dumb luck carried you through. If you didn't, it might return, or worse, take someone else. So even if you had nothing, you made something. A crust of bread shaped like a heart, a bit of soup stirred widdershins, a candle lit at dusk. Survival wasn't just survival, it had to be acknowledged. Scholars sometimes dismiss these traditions as quaint or exaggerated, but when you're living it, when you've watched fever tug someone to the edge and then barely let them go, it doesn't feel silly, it feels necessary. Later that day, you and your brother brave the outside for more firewood. The wind's worse than before, but you walk with a different energy now. The kind that comes from winning a round. You find a few good branches near the tree line and drag them back triumphantly. Your hands go numb, your cheeks sting, but you're grinning like a fool the whole way. Back at the cottage, your sister's sitting upright for the first time in days, swaddled in enough blankets to look like a particularly judgmental turnip. She smiles when she sees the wood. Your father lights the fire higher than usual. Your mother hums a tune you don't recognize. That night, instead of stew, you have gruel, which doesn't sound like an upgrade, but it's different. Oats, water, a pinch of salt, and, this is the big one, a spoonful of dried apple stirred in for flavor. It's lumpy and weird and kind of gray, but it tastes like triumph. Afterward, you all sit around the fire, too full to sleep, too exhausted to talk. The wind rattles the shutters, but the house doesn't feel threatened anymore. It feels held. You made it through the worst, you think. And even if more bad nights are coming, tonight is a good one. You fall asleep with warmth in your belly, music in your ears, and the taste of honey still lingering on your tongue. Kids don't really understand the cold the way adults do. Sure, they feel it, they shiver and whine, and their fingers go red and raw just like yours. But they don't grasp it, not truly, not the way it lingers in your joints or leaches into your hope. For children, cold is temporary. It's just the price you pay for running outside to chase a chicken or slide down a frozen hill on a broken board. For adults, it's something heavier, a weight, a threat, a presence that doesn't go away even when the fire is roaring. Still, the kids in your household somehow manage to carve out moments of play in the bleakest corners of the season. Your little brother, cheeks bright with windburn, spent half the morning turning lumps of icy mud into an army of what he claims are guard pigs to defend the woodpile from wolves. He even gave them tiny bark helmets. Your sister, finally awake and almost stable after her brush with the fever, watched from inside, eyes tired but smiling as he narrated their heroic battle against imaginary foes. It's almost absurd, this defiance, this willingness to pretend in the face of such an obviously unfriendly world. But that's childhood, isn't it? Making magic out of misery. You remember doing it too, building snow forts with rotten timbers, sledding down the root cellar's frozen slope, eating icicles off the roof and pretending they were royal feasts. You didn't know then that the roof was leaking, that the bread was running low, that your mother was deciding whether she could stretch the meat another day. Kids weren't spared the cold, but they were spared the meaning of it. And yet, winter didn't ignore them. You remember last year when a neighbor's child, a boy no older than your brother, didn't wake up after a particularly bitter night. No fever, no wolves, just cold. You remember the silence that followed in that house, how the mother moved through her chores like her limbs were made of smoke. The fire was never quite the same in there afterward. So even though your siblings laugh and build guard pigs and make up songs about stealing honey from bees in the afterlife, you still watch them with quiet worry. You check their fingers, their noses, their breath in the morning. You make sure they eat something, even if it's just hot broth. You make sure their cloaks are patched and their boots stuffed with hay. And when they're not looking, you add another log to the fire, even if it's meant for tomorrow. Children survived medieval winters by being protected. Not by walls, those were flimsy and cold, but by people. Layer after layer of care from tired hands who'd seen too many bad seasons to pretend otherwise. Babies were swaddled and tucked under cloaks. Toddlers slept between adults like living kindling. Older children shared the bed box and sometimes didn't even get their own blanket, just shared body heat and dreams. You remember being small and sleeping under the same fur as your cousins. There were 8 of you in one bed, and you didn't complain, because that many bodies in one space meant you might actually keep your nose warm. You remember playing Ice Ghost under the blankets, pretending to haunt your siblings until they begged you to stop, then begged you to start again. And here's a bittersweet fringe fact. In some households, children were sent to sleep in barns on especially cold nights, not as punishment, but because it was warmer. Packed hay, warm animals, and smaller spaces meant less heat loss. If the cow liked you, you could sleep pressed right against its belly. Gross? Maybe, but cozy. Today, your brother asks if he can sleep by the hearth, not in the bed box, just near the fire, curled in a heap of blankets like a dog. You let him. He's earned it after patrolling the yard all morning with his bark-armored pigs. He falls asleep quickly, head on a stack of rags, mouth open, snoring softly. Your sister doesn't play much yet, but she watches. That's enough. She holds a carved button in her lap, her only real toy, and rolls it between her fingers, whispering to it like it's listening. You don't ask what she's saying, some magic shouldn't be interrupted. And here's where scholars argue again. Some say medieval children were treated like mini-adults, put to work young, given few chances to play, burdened early with survival. Others argue the opposite, that children were cherished and protected fiercely, even in poverty, that play and laughter were essential distractions in a world that offered few. Based on what you've seen, both are true. Your brother still helps gather wood. Your sister still tries to stir the stew when she has the strength. But they're allowed joy, too. They're allowed to throw snowballs, to sing badly, to believe their stuffed goose, really just a sack with feathers, has a name and feelings. You fall asleep that night to the sound of your brother whispering a story to the dog. Something about a prince who lives in a well and only comes out when the snow melts. The dog doesn't understand, but he wags his tail anyway. And for a moment, the cottage doesn't feel like a trap or a coffin. It feels like a world where children still have dreams. And as long as they do, so do you. The change is so small at first, you almost miss it. You're outside, early, gathering what little firewood you and your brother managed to dry under the lean-to. The air still bites your face and turns your breath into mist, but something's off. Not in a bad way, just different. You stand still for a second, brow furrowed, staring up at the sky. And then you get it. It's the light, and there's more of it. Not much, just a few extra minutes, a sliver of brightness barely wider than a sigh. But it's there, real. The sky isn't quite so leaden today. The clouds look higher, thinner. The sun, though still pale and watery, hangs on just a touch longer before dipping behind the trees. You blink and check again, squinting like it's a trick. But no, it really is lasting longer. The sun, the light, the day. You drop your armload of sticks and rush back inside, bursting through the door with all the drama of someone returning from a holy vision. It's longer, you gasp. The day! It's longer! Your father raises an eyebrow, unimpressed. That's how seasons work, he says, deadpan. But your mother turns toward the window, squinting just like you did. Her lips twitch, not quite a smile, but close. I noticed, she says softly. Yesterday. Didn't want to jinx it. Your sister doesn't say anything. She's sitting in her usual spot, too wrapped in blankets to move much. But she closes her eyes, and you can tell she's picturing it. The sun lasting longer, the world slowly unfurling. After weeks of endless gray, it feels like a whisper from the earth. I'm still here.
These early signs of spring are never dramatic. No blooming flowers, no sudden warmth, just tiny hints, a slow drip from the eaves as the icicles shrink, a bit of green poking through the snow near the threshold, the way the birds start to sound like they might be warming up for a proper concert. Not singing yet, just clearing their throats. You check the barn later and notice something else. The cow is less cranky, still cold, still unimpressed by life, but there's a little more energy in her steps. She tosses her head when you come in like she might remember what grass feels like. You refill her water and rub her nose. Her breath steams in the air, and for the first time, it doesn't immediately freeze to your cloak. Even the pig snorts with more enthusiasm than usual, which could just be gas, but you're taking it as a good sign. That night, your family gathers around the fire like always, but the mood's different. You're still hungry, yes, still sore and tired, but there's an edge of something else now, a low hum beneath the silence, a readiness. Your mother pulls out the seed pouch, not to plant, not yet, but to count, to inspect. She runs her fingers through the tiny treasures like a merchant counting coins. Beans, barley, cabbage seed, a few precious carrot cores wrapped in cloth. They'll need to go in as soon as the ground softens, she murmurs, more to herself than anyone else. Your father nods, already half thinking about which patch of the field will thaw first. Your brother asks if the bees are dead. You don't know the answer. No one does. But your mother says, we'll find out soon. Here's a fringe detail you've always liked. In some villages, people swore they could smell spring before they saw it. Not flowers or grass, just the scent of softened earth, like the world's breath had changed. Some even claimed to dream of green fields before they sprouted. You never put much stock in it, but tonight, as you sit near the fire with your cloak wrapped tight and your belly just barely full, you realise you do smell something. It's not stew, it's not smoke, it's mud, barely there, I promise. You tell your sister and she laughs weakly, and then says, "I dreamed of rain." And that's enough to make everyone stop and look at her, because dreaming of rain in the heart of winter is the closest thing to prophecy any of you have. And here's where historians love to argue. Some believe medieval people marked the changing seasons with precision, tracking solstices, planting days, lunar cycles. Others say peasants mostly went by feel, by birdsong, by the way the frost cracked, by gut instinct. You don't have a calendar hanging on the wall, but you know what today is. Today is almost spring, almost. You go to bed that night still bundled tight, but with your hand resting near the window's edge, where the cloth is thinner. You want to feel the shift. You want to be the first to notice when the air changes for real. Your sleep is deep, the kind of sleep that comes after weeks of waking at every sound. And in your dreams, the snow recedes, the fields bloom, and you walk barefoot through a patch of mud that squishes between your toes. You wake up smiling. The frost is still on the walls, the fire needs tending. But the sun rises just a bit higher today, and you're already counting the minutes. It's been 87 days since the frost first sealed your door shut. Not that anyone's counting officially. You don't have a calendar scrawled on the wall or knots tied in twine, but in your bones, you know. Winter's grip has been long, hard, and unforgiving. And yet here you are, sitting on the log by the doorway, hands warmed by the morning fire, watching a single drop of water trace its way down from the thatched roof and splash into the dirt like it's a miracle. Because honestly it is. The roof's dripping, not leaking, melting. One drip becomes two, then four, then a slow, steady pattern, like nature trying to hum a lullaby. You run your fingers over the wooden lintel and feel dampness. You don't recoil. You smile. A month ago that would have meant mould or rot or a roof ready to collapse. Now it means the sun's doing its job again. Inside, your mother hums as she stirs the pot. Not stew today, but something thinner. More hopeful, if that makes sense. A broth made from a small sprig of early greens she found pushing through the frost near the chicken coop. It's barely more than coloured water, but the taste is unmistakable, fresh. After weeks of salt, smoke and sour, that tiny taste of something alive sends a little jolt through your whole body. Your father's sharpening tools. Not because there's work to do today, there isn't, but because he's preparing. Because you don't sharpen blades in winter unless you believe spring is close enough to need them. The hoe, the spade, the shears that haven't seen a growing thing since the last harvest, all lined up, oiled, gleaming in the firelight like a promise. Your brother is outside kicking snowmelt down the path, carving little rivers through the slush and pretending he's making canals for ferry boats. The dog watches, tail half wagging, no longer curled in on himself like a frozen loaf of bread. Even he seems to know that something has shifted. And your sister sits near the hearth with her sleeves rolled up, sorting lentils one by one into a pot with a concentration usually reserved for prayer. Her fever is gone, her colour is back, and her voice has started returning in small matter-of-fact sentences. Today, she says, if I see another boiled root, I'm running away. You don't laugh, you just nod, because honestly, same. The house still creaks. The wind still taps at the shutters, but it no longer howls with teeth. It whistles now, still cold but losing its edge. And when you walk outside to check the livestock, you notice something you haven't seen in weeks. Mud. Real, soft, squishy mud. Your boot sinks halfway in before you curse and nearly fall, but instead of swearing you grin, because that's how it starts. First the thaw, then the flood, then the green. A few of the hens have started laying again. Only 1 or 2 eggs every few days, and half are frozen solid before anyone can gather them, but still, eggs. The cow's milk has gone from pitiful to merely underwhelming. The pig grunts more than he wheezes. Everything's moving in that sluggish, early spring way. Not fast, not reliable, but forward. Your mother even lit a second candle last night. For luck, she said, and for light. No one argued. You don't exactly throw open the doors and declare victory over winter. That would be tempting fate. And winter, spiteful old thing that it is, might decide to dump a blizzard on your head just for fun. But even the old folks in the village, the ones who always mutter about just one more cold snap before the lambs arrive, are talking about planting, about digging, about going outside. And when the priest trudges through the village today, robes damp and beard frosted, he's not offering prayers for survival, he's blessing seeds. Seeds! You watch as he presses his wrinkled hands over a basket of barley kernels and murmurs something in Latin, then grins, actually grins, and says, "If the mice didn't get them all, you might eat well this year." Everyone laughs, real laughter. Not the dry, bitter kind you heard in January, but something from the belly. Even the cows look amused. You help patch the roof this afternoon, climbing up on creaky beams and stuffing fresh straw between the old thatch to keep the coming rains out. The snow slides off in fat, wet clumps, landing with sloppy splats in the yard below. You don't mind. You'll take wet and messy over cold and dead any day. At one point you sit up there, hands muddy, boots soaked, and just look around. The village is waking up. Smoke curls from more chimneys. Doors open. Chickens squawk. Somewhere someone's hammering, probably mending a sled into a wheelbarrow. And for the first time in a very long time, no one looks like they're trying to vanish into their own coats. It's not warm exactly, but it's not hopeless. And here's something the historians rarely mention. No one celebrated surviving winter. Not formally. There were no parades or ceremonies or holidays, but that doesn't mean it wasn't marked. People painted their doors, swept their hearths, sang louder, ate better. Even if better just meant one egg and a cup of fresh greens. They noticed. Because getting through winter wasn't just an annual routine. It was an achievement. A gamble with death that this year you happened to win. So you sit on the roof a bit longer. Let the chill wind slap your cheeks and the watery sun squint down at you. You run a hand along the patchy thatch and mutter a thank you to it, even though it didn't always do its job. Your sister waves from below. "You're going to fall," she calls. You wave back. "If I do, aim me at the pig pen." Even she laughs. You climb down, your muscles aching in a good way for once. And as the sun sinks behind the trees, later than it did yesterday, you light the evening fire. Not to fight off despair, but just to be comfortable. The cold is still here, but so are you. You made it. All of you did. And now, as the last embers settle in the hearth and your family curls into their beds, something finally shifts. Not in the walls or the weather, but in you. The fear that sat on your chest all winter has lifted, not all at once, but slowly, like a blanket being peeled back in layers. You're still tired, still hungry, but you're also alive, and that counts for something. Tomorrow will bring more work. The fields need clearing, the tools need sharpening, and there are still repairs to make before spring fully blooms. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, you sit with your back to the warm stones, hands resting in your lap, listening to the soft, even breathing of your siblings and the quiet ticking of the cooling firewood. No wolves scratching at the walls, no fever moans, no midnight crises, just stillness, and the kind that doesn't feel like death this time, but like rest. You stare up at the low ceiling and realise, for the first time in a long while, that you've stopped counting how many days until the snow melts. You've stopped measuring life by the inches of wood left in the stack. You've stopped bracing. Spring isn't here yet, but you know it's coming, and you're ready. You smile a little in the dark and pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders, one hand brushing the edge of the windowsill where the frost has finally begun to retreat. Somehow, in spite of everything, you made it through. So go ahead, close your eyes. The worst is behind you now, and the earth is starting to wake up.